I never thought a dinner reservation could make me question my place in the family, but I guess there's a first for everything. My name's Lucas, I'm 26, and I've always had this quiet, background role in my family. Not the favorite, not the rebel, not the golden child, just Lucas. I show up on time, smile when I'm supposed to, send the birthday texts, and try not to make waves. You'd think that would earn me some respect, or at the very least, a seat at the table. Apparently not. Growing up, I always felt like the spare wheel. My older sister, Brielle, was the overachieving golden child, straight A's, captain of every club. Her wedding was the stuff of Pinterest boards. My younger brother, Evan, was the wild card, the jokester, the one who could mess up royally and still get a pass because boys will be boys. And then there was me, the middle child who got decent grades, never crashed the car, and quietly paid my own way through college while everyone fussed over the other two. It wasn't malicious, at least not at first. Just habitual neglect, like I was a background character in their sitcom. My parents, though, now they're the real stars. My mom's the type who thrives on appearances. She loves telling her friends about the kids, especially when there's something bragworthy involved. She'll post pictures of Brielle's baby bump with long captions about how blessed she is, or share Evan's latest half-baked business idea like he's the next Steve Jobs. Me? I once got promoted to team lead at my tech job and got a dry thumbs-up emoji in the family group chat. So when they announced they were treating the whole family to dinner at this upscale restaurant in the city, I figured maybe, just maybe, they were trying to reconnect. It had been a weird year. A lot of distance, fewer calls, and some friction ever since I turned down their suggestion to move back home for a while. But I let that go. I figured this dinner could be a fresh start. I even dressed up a bit. Nice blazer, button-down shirt, good shoes. I showed up on time, as usual. The restaurant was one of those fancy places with the dim lighting and tiny candles on the tables. Brielle arrived with her husband, Caleb, who always had a smug grin like he was tolerating everyone just to earn points. Evan brought his new girlfriend, someone named Tasha with sharp nails and a louder laugh than the jazz saxophone playing in the background. My parents were already seated when I walked in, Mom waving like she was holding court, Dad checking his watch, and probably calculating the wine prices in his head. "Lucas, you made it," Mom said with that same performative warmth she used when bumping into acquaintances she only half-liked. I gave her a quick hug, nodded to Dad, and greeted the others. Everyone was dressed up. Sipping from wine glasses like this was some royal affair. There were 6 chairs at the table, 3 couples, I noticed. My parents, Brielle and Caleb, Evan and Tasha. I paused, wondering where I was supposed to sit. "There's a small table just over there," Mom said, pointing to a two-top near the window. "We figured it'd be better for you to sit there. You know, since this table's sort of a couple's thing." I laughed, thinking she was joking, but nobody else was laughing. "Wait, you're serious?" I asked. "Don't make a scene, honey," she replied, already turning back to her wine. "We just thought it'd be less awkward for everyone. You'll be more comfortable over there anyway." The waiter came by just as I was trying to process the absurdity of it all. My entire family, sitting together at this long, elegant table, and me, exiled to the kids' table because I was the only one who had the audacity to show up without a +1. I looked at the small table. It wasn't even in the same section. It was pushed near the back, by a window that looked out at a brick wall. No candle, no wine glasses, just 2 plain place settings like an afterthought. I felt like an afterthought. Still, I didn't argue. I didn't roll my eyes or say anything snarky. I just nodded once and quietly made my way over to the table. The waiter followed me, pulling out the chair. I could feel the heat creeping up my neck, not from anger yet, more like embarrassment. The kind that sticks to your skin like sweat. From my seat, I could still see them laughing. Mom was showing baby photos to the waiter, Brielle was toasting with her husband, and Dad was already deep in conversation with Evan about some new investment he was helping him with. They didn't even glance my way. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about seating. It was a metaphor for my entire relationship with them. Always nearby, but never included. Always convenient, never central. The odd one out, not because I'd done something wrong, but because I didn't fit the image they wanted to project. I wasn't married, I didn't bring grandkids, and I didn't need anything from them. And in this family, usefulness was currency. I took a deep breath, opened the menu, and told the waiter I'd be paying separately. He gave me a sympathetic smile. Maybe he'd seen this kind of thing before. Maybe not. Either way, I wasn't about to let them lump my tab in with theirs. I'd order what I wanted, enjoy the meal, and leave. At least that was the plan. But then the bill came, and something on it made me pause. I glanced at the waiter, then back at the sleek black folder in my hands. The numbers didn't match. There were additional items, expensive ones. Wine bottles I hadn't ordered. Appetizers for the table. A ridiculous seafood platter. Confused, I asked the waiter to clarify. "Oh," he said, leaning down slightly. "The main table mentioned you'd be covering the bill. They said to just add everything to your tab. That's what your mother told us when you first arrived." For a second, I just sat there, staring. I could still see them across the room, all smiles, all laughter, clinking glasses and basking in their own little fantasy. I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. I felt cold, and I realized, if they wanted to treat me like the outsider, the third wheel, the forgotten son, fine. But they were about to learn exactly what that meant. And this time, I wouldn't be the one paying the price. I didn't move at first. I just sat there, holding the check like it was a dead bird someone had dropped in my lap. The waiter stood there awkwardly, probably waiting for a response, but my brain was frozen, stuck in this weird limbo between disbelief and a strange, creeping numbness. "I'm sorry," I finally said, trying to keep my voice steady. "They said what?" He glanced back toward the main table, where the whole family was deep in some loud debate about whether the lobster bisque was better than the scallops. "Your mother said you'd be covering tonight's dinner," he repeated gently, "for the whole family. That's what she told the front desk when you called in the reservation. She confirmed it again when they were seated. Except I hadn't called in the reservation. I hadn't even known where we were eating until this morning when Brielle texted the name of the restaurant. I was at work, took one look at the place, shook my head at the menu prices, and figured, hey, must be a special occasion if they're choosing somewhere like this. And now it made sense. It wasn't generosity. It was theater. It was another production, another perfectly curated evening where appearances came first and the rest of us were just props on stage. Except this time, I wasn't even allowed on stage. I'd been shoved into the audience and handed the bill. I looked back down. Over $870. And that didn't include tip. I was still staring at the total when the waiter cleared his throat softly. "Would you like me to run the card on file, sir?" Card on file. My stomach turned. I only had one card linked to my name. My family did have it. Or, rather, my mom did. Years ago, I let her use it temporarily when she was helping me handle some tuition payments. I never thought to remove it. It was a joint account at the time, and I'd eventually split off and opened a new one when I got a better job, but the old card remained active, mostly untouched. I'd always meant to cancel it, just never got around to it. And now here it was, being used against me. I gave a tight smile, took the check, and told the waiter I'd be handling it myself. He nodded and walked off, and I immediately pulled out my phone, logged into my account, and saw the pending charge, already authorized. They hadn't just assumed I'd pay. They planned it. They set me up. That cold feeling returned, but this time it wasn't shock. It was clarity. I stood up, trying to steady my breathing, and walked slowly toward the main table. No one noticed me at first. My mom was fussing over Tasha's earrings. Evan was halfway through some long-winded story about an argument he got into at work. One of those, I totally own my boss, type rants he always exaggerated. Brielle was scrolling on her phone, only half listening to Caleb drone on about house renovations. I stopped beside my father, who looked up briefly, eyebrows raised. "Lucas, you good?" he asked, as if I were the one being weird. I didn't speak right away, just looked at my mom. She finally glanced over and gave me this bright, artificial smile. "Everything okay, sweetie?" "You told them I was covering dinner," I said flatly. Her smile didn't fade. "Well, yes. You said you got that new promotion at work, didn't you? We figured it was a nice gesture. Family supporting family. You know, giving back. Don't make a scene. Giving back. Like I owed them something. Like they hadn't spent years overlooking me, dismissing me, and now decided I should be grateful to foot the bill for a dinner I wasn't even allowed to sit at." I didn't yell. I didn't throw the check in anyone's face. I just turned and walked away, straight past the hostess, out the front door, onto the street. I stood there on the sidewalk for a few seconds, letting the cool night air hit me like a slap. And then I did three things. First, I called my bank, told them the card was being used without authorization. The fraud team put it on hold immediately and flagged the restaurant charge as suspicious. They assured me the funds would be reversed pending investigation. Second, I logged into the card's online portal and canceled the entire thing. Permanently. No more shared access. No more old connections. Third, I called a rideshare, got into the car, and didn't look back. I was halfway home when my phone lit up. Missed call, Mom. Missed call, Dad. Text from Evan. Dude, what? You just left. Text from Brielle. That was super immature. You embarrassed Mom in front of everyone. Text from Mom. We need to talk. The waiter says your card was declined. Please fix this before we have to involve the manager. I didn't reply. Instead, I sent one message. Just one. If only couples sit with adults, I guess I'm not one. So you shouldn't expect me to pay like one. No response. Not for 20 minutes. And then all hell broke loose. The group chat lit up like a Christmas tree. Dad. Lucas, this isn't funny. We're sitting here trying to figure this out. Come back and settle this like a man. Mom. You are humiliating us. What kind of son behaves like this? Brielle. You're acting like a child. Grow up. It's just dinner. Evan. Yo, this is not cool. They had to call the manager. That last one almost made me laugh. Like I had ruined their big evening. Their perfect, carefully crafted dinner where I was nothing more than an extra. But then I got the message that broke me. It wasn't in the group chat. It came privately. From my mom. I don't know what's gotten into you lately, but this behavior is exactly why we don't include you more. You always make things about yourself. That's when I snapped. Because for so long, I'd swallowed it. Every ignored accomplishment, every brushed off text, every holiday where I was stuck on airport duty while the others took group photos by the fireplace. I'd endured the guilt trips, the backhanded compliments, the patronizing concern about my single lifestyle. I told myself it was family, that they meant well, that maybe I just wasn't trying hard enough to connect. But this message, this little slice of weaponized guilt, it was the final straw. I didn't reply. Instead, I scrolled through years of messages and saw the pattern. The time they forgot my birthday, but remembered Evan's with a week-long beach trip. The time I got promoted and they changed the subject to Brielle's new couch. The time I said I couldn't lend money because I was saving for a house and they called me selfish. The pattern wasn't subtle. I just hadn't wanted to see it. But now I did. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The car pulled up outside my apartment. I got out, paid, walked inside, and just stood in my kitchen. Still dressed from dinner, blazer wrinkled, tie half loosened. And I realized something. They didn't treat me like family. They treated me like a service. The reliable one. The quiet one. The one who shows up, shuts up, and pays up. But that guy was gone now. And the next time they tried to call him, they'd get someone very, very different. I didn't sleep that night. It wasn't because I was overwhelmed or filled with rage. I wasn't even anxious anymore. I was hollow, like someone had scooped everything out of me and left the shell behind, standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m. with the fridge door open, staring blankly at an unopened bottle of orange juice like it held the answers. After the messages stopped coming in, after the shouting over text turned into stone-cold silence, I just stood there in the quiet. No tears, no pacing, just stillness. I'd finally called out the people who had sidelined me my entire life, and in return, they made it clear they never saw me as one of them to begin with. I knew I had done the right thing, but it still hurt. That's the part no one tells you about standing up for yourself. It's not empowering right away. Not always. Sometimes, it just feels like you've blown up your entire life, and all you're left with is ringing ears and rubble. I kept checking my phone, like an idiot, waiting for one message. Any message that sounded like an apology. Some acknowledgement. Even a half-hearted, maybe we should have asked first. But it never came. They went dark. The next morning, I was supposed to head to a family brunch. One mom insisted was part of the whole weekend experience, as if I were on some cruise line I didn't sign up for. I didn't go. I didn't even text. Instead, I walked. I left my phone on the nightstand and took a long, quiet stroll through the city. The sun was out, but it was cold. Wind slicing between buildings, people rushing with coffees and scarves and headphones. I just blended in. I needed to feel anonymous, like I wasn't the disappointment, the problem, the one who ruined dinner. That night, I turned off my location sharing. I left the family group chat. No dramatic exit, just gone. Silence. For the next week, I didn't hear a word from any of them. Not one. Not even a stray meme from Evan or a guilt-laced paragraph from Mom. And that silence did something strange. It settled into me like a rock in a stream. Heavy at first, but over time, it became grounding. And then came the crash. Not emotionally, financially. See, that shared card they used? It wasn't just the restaurant bill they tried to dump on me. I'd pulled the statements. There were months of accidental charges linked to that account. Uber rides, subscription services, spa payments, a $700 charge to a boutique furniture store that I sure never set foot in. And I hadn't been checking the statements because, like a fool, I assumed if I wasn't using the card, nothing would happen. I called the bank again. They were sympathetic, but because the card had technically still been active and previously shared, the disputes were shaky. I filed claims anyway, but there was no guarantee. I was staring down over $3,200 in losses. And that's when the reality sank in. I'd been their invisible wallet for months. They didn't just expect me to pay for one dinner. They were depending on me to cover things they didn't even tell me about. The betrayal landed like a punch to the ribs. But something shifted in me. It was like the fog finally cleared, and I saw the truth, not just about them, but about myself. I had spent years bending over backwards to be the easy child, the agreeable one, the one who didn't make a fuss, who didn't demand attention, who just showed up and handled things. And they had taken that version of me and milked it until I didn't recognize myself anymore. I wasn't angry anymore. I was done. And being done, that's where the real change began. I started small. I pulled out a notebook and made a list. Not a list of goals or revenge fantasies, but a realistic checklist of everything I'd been putting off in service of others. Cancel shared accounts. Change passwords. Update direct deposit to new bank. Remove emergency contacts. Talk to HR about removing family from health benefits. Make therapy appointment. Each checkmark felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. I started meal prepping instead of eating whatever was quick. I worked out 3 times that week, not for looks or revenge or some "I'll show them" montage, just because I needed to feel in control of my own body again. I cleaned my apartment, deep cleaned, got rid of old stuff I was holding onto out of guilt. Family hand-me-downs, gifted furniture, clothes I never liked. I donated it all or tossed it. My place started to feel like mine for the first time. Work became easier, too. I wasn't distracted anymore, constantly looking at my phone, trying to decode passive-aggressive texts. I got more done in a week than I had in months. My boss noticed. Even offered me a stretch project, something with visibility, the kind of task they only give to people they're testing for the next step up. The best part? I started saying no. No to random favors. No to staying late because someone else dropped the ball. No to being the catch-all guy who always smiled and picked up slack. I wasn't rude about it. I was just firm. And people respected it. Funny how that works. The world didn't fall apart when I started valuing myself. In fact, it got quieter. I went 3 full weeks with no contact from my family. Not even on Sundays, which used to be their sacred check-in day. I didn't reach out either. Not because I was holding a grudge, but because I finally understood something. I didn't miss them. I missed the idea of family. The fantasy version I'd clung to, where I'd someday be seen and appreciated and embraced as an equal. But that version? It didn't exist. What I had was a transactional, shallow performance of family, and I wasn't signing up for it anymore. Then came the email. Of course it was Brielle. She always fancied herself the neutral party, the peacemaker. Subject line: let's talk. Hey Lucas, I think we all need to just clear the air. Everyone's still a little tense, but this has gotten out of hand. Mom and Dad are hurt. They don't understand why you'd ghost us over one misunderstanding. I'm not saying you didn't have a point, but couldn't you have just talked to them? You always overreact to things like this. We're having a small gathering next weekend. Nothing big. Just family. It would be nice if you came. Let's not drag this out. Life's too short. Brielle. I read it twice. 3 times. And each time, my chest tightened. Not from guilt, but from the sheer predictability of it. You always overreact. There it was. The refrain of my life. The way they minimized everything. The way they painted my boundaries as tantrums. I didn't reply. Instead, I opened a new document and started writing. Not a response, but everything I wanted to say. Not for them. For me. It poured out of me like water from a cracked dam. All the birthdays forgotten. The broken promises. The years of being told I was so independent whenever I needed something and they didn't feel like giving it. The way my mom weaponized guilt like it was currency. The way Dad only called when he needed tech help or an account explained. The way Evan took without a second thought. The way Brielle saw everything and still played the middle. By the end, I had 12 pages. And I realized I didn't want to send it. Because they didn't deserve my explanation. They didn't want to understand. They just wanted the version of me who made their lives easier. So instead of replying to Brielle, I booked a weekend trip. Just me, a cabin, and a lake. No signal. No noise. The moment I stepped into that cabin, I felt something shift. A lightness I hadn't felt in years. I brought my sketchbook, something I hadn't touched since college. I made pancakes. I slept in. I sat on the dock with a cup of coffee and didn't do anything for anyone. And I realized something important. You don't have to earn peace. You just have to stop giving it away. And me? I was done giving. The lake was glass that morning. I sat at the edge of the dock, legs dangling, fingers curled around a steaming mug of coffee I'd brewed in the tiny cabin kitchen. No messages. No notifications. Just silence and the soft lapping of water brushing the wooden beams beneath me. Somewhere behind me, a bird sang out, and I smiled. Not because it was beautiful, but because it wasn't someone calling to ask if I could just quickly Venmo them gas money or remind me that, your family, Lucas, don't make things weird. For the first time in my adult life, I felt entirely mine. But peace has a funny way of sharpening things. The quieter life got, the clearer I began to see the patterns I had ignored for years. The manipulation, the emotional bait and switch, the way they dressed up control as love. I had always assumed I was being selfish for wanting space. But in that solitude, I realized I hadn't been selfish. I'd been starving. And now that I had found peace, I wasn't just going to protect it. I was going to weaponize it. See, the old version of me, passive, quiet, conflict-averse, he would have let it go. Moved on. Taken the high road. Told himself that cutting contact was enough. But this wasn't just about boundaries anymore. They hadn't accidentally used my card. They hadn't innocently excluded me from their curated little dinner party. They'd set me up, lied to a restaurant, built an entire illusion of generosity on my dime. And they were mad at me for disrupting it. That wasn't a misunderstanding. That was a heist. And if they were going to treat me like a resource, like a walking wallet they could bleed dry whenever their performance needed a budget, then I'd show them what happens when the wallet gets a spine. I started small. Back in the city, the first thing I did was finally take a scalpel to my digital footprint. I combed through every account I had. Banks, credit cards, subscription services, streaming logins, rideshare apps. Anything with shared access? Gone. Passwords changed. Permissions revoked. Names scrubbed. The funny part was how many accounts still had their emails listed under recovery contact. I hadn't even realized. All those little, oh, just use mine, it's easier moments had created a web I was trapped in. I deleted every thread of it. Then I went to work. Literally and figuratively. At the office, I threw myself into that stretch project my boss had floated. It was tough. Lots of late nights, technical hurdles, a steep learning curve. But it was the kind of work that mattered. The kind that got noticed. I stayed quiet about my family situation. When people asked how my weekend was, I just smiled and said, peaceful. That was the truth. But at night, I planned. It started with a spreadsheet. Names, dates, transactions. I traced every suspicious charge on that old card. Matched them to receipts, screenshots, geotags from their social media posts. A manicure appointment here. A dinner tagged #date night there. They'd been reckless. Entitled people usually are. Then I remembered something from years ago. When I was 19, my mom had asked me to help her organize the family finances. She'd gotten overwhelmed with paperwork. I built her a shared Google Drive folder. Taught her how to scan and upload bank statements, receipts, warranties, everything. She never deleted it. Just got lazy. Kept uploading. Out of curiosity, I logged in. And there it was. Every document. Still meticulously sorted. Insurance forms. Mortgage paperwork. Tax returns. And, bingo, copies of my credit card statements. Even after I'd split the account. They hadn't just used my card. They'd been tracking it. I downloaded everything. Stored it on an encrypted drive. Labeled every file. Color-coded every abuse. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. This was financial exploitation. And I was done playing polite. But I didn't want revenge that burned bridges. I wanted one that revealed them. That exposed the imbalance for what it was. Not just to me, but to anyone they tried to manipulate in the future. I wasn't going to scream at them. I was going to force them to look in the mirror. And so, I started setting the stage. First, I reached out to my Uncle Martin, Mom's brother, kind of the black sheep of the family, gruff, divorced twice, chain-smoked cigars and never made it past middle management. But he was sharp, and he hated phonies, especially Mom's carefully curated happy family act. I called him under the pretense of catching up. We talked for an hour. About work, life, the time he got food poisoning at Evan's graduation party and still hasn't forgiven them for it. He laughed when I brought it up. Then I casually asked, "Hey, Uncle M, you ever feel like our family only calls when they need something?" Dead silence. Then a dry chuckle. "Lucas, that's the only time they call." So I told him, not everything, just enough. The card, the dinner, the fact that they told the restaurant I'd pay for everything without asking me, then tried to guilt me when I refused. There was a long pause. Then he said, "You want help making sure they remember it?" And just like that, I had my first ally. Uncle Martin didn't have a lot of influence, but he had ears. He was still looped into all the cousin group chats, the second-tier family updates, the ones where Mom's perfect family image circulated. He offered to do one thing, start talking. Not dramatically, just the occasional, "You hear what happened with Lucas?" over coffee. A raised eyebrow at a reunion. A slow, "Huh? That doesn't sound like the whole story." I didn't ask for lies. I just asked for the truth to breathe. Then came step 2, setting the bait. A few days later, I posted a photo on social media. Me, on a rooftop, dressed sharp, skyline behind me, holding a drink. Caption, "Some doors only open once you shut the wrong ones." I never post. So of course, it got their attention. Within hours, Evan viewed it. Then Brielle. Then Mom. The next day, a message. From Dad. "Hey kiddo. Hope you're doing okay. Your mother's a little worried. Can we talk sometime soon?" Not his worry. Hers. And sometime soon. Not even a specific effort. Old me would have replied instantly. Eager to smooth it over. To be the peacemaker. Even when I was the one hurt. New me waited 4 days. Then replied, "I'm open to talking. But only if it's actually a conversation, not just you guys defending yourselves." Another message followed. This time from Brielle. "I think everyone would feel better if we just aired everything out in person. You know how things can be misinterpreted over text. Let's just talk." I agreed. But I picked the place. Neutral ground. Public. No audience they could rally. I booked a table at a quiet tea shop near my office. A place where people talk, not perform. Then I printed everything. Not to confront them, not yet. But to see how they reacted when the power dynamic shifted. The card statements. The screenshots. The email thread where Mom confirmed I'd pay the restaurant. The bank letter confirming their use of the card after I'd separated accounts. I slid everything into a black folder. This wasn't a tantrum. This was documentation. I rehearsed what I'd say, not a script, just anchors. I'm not angry. I'm disappointed. And I see things clearly now. This isn't about money. It's about how you see me. You've used love like a favor I have to earn. I'm not here to be part of the family you pretend to have. I'm here to tell you who I really am. I wasn't looking for an apology. I was looking for a reaction. Because people show their truest selves when they lose control. And I had taken theirs away. They showed up 15 minutes late. I was already on my second cup of oolong tea when my parents and Brielle walked into the cafe. Dad in a too-tight blazer he probably hadn't worn since Evan's engagement party. Mom with her concerned matriarch face on, creased brow, pursed lips, like she was about to deliver tragic news at a PDA meeting. And Brielle, arms crossed, phone in hand, like this was an inconvenience she was gracing me with. I didn't stand up. I didn't smile. I just nodded toward the empty seats. Mom sat first. "Lucas, honey. I'd prefer if we skipped the honey," I said calmly. "Let's talk like adults. Equal footing." That threw her off. She glanced at Dad. He said nothing, just sat back in his chair and exhaled heavily, like this whole thing was a burden to him. Brielle rolled her eyes so hard I could hear it. "I don't want to fight," I continued. "I just want to set the record straight. And then I'll decide what comes next." I pulled out the black folder and placed it on the table like a chessboard. Brielle raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" Mom blinked. "What's that?" "Documentation," I said. "Everything from the card charges you made after I removed myself from that account. Screenshots of the messages you sent the restaurant claiming I'd cover the bill. Bank correspondence. Logs. Receipts. Dad leaned forward, suddenly alert. You're accusing us of what fraud? I'm not accusing anyone, I said. I'm confirming what happened. You used me. Repeatedly. Without asking. And when I refused to play along, you turned it into a Lucas has always been dramatic narrative. Mom's lips tightened. Lucas, I don't think you understand the full context. I held up a hand. You mean the context where I was good enough to pay, but not good enough to sit with you? She flushed. Dad muttered something under his breath. I'm not here to argue, I said. I'm here to explain what happens next. I pulled out 3 letters, one for each of them, and slid them across the table. Brielle picked hers up and started reading. What is this? She asked. Her voice had lost its edge. It's a bill, I said. Itemized. For every unauthorized charge made using my card. With due dates. You're serious? Dad asked, voice rising. Dead serious, I replied. I've already submitted the documentation to my lawyer. If I don't receive reimbursement, we'll pursue it through small claims court. Brielle scoffed. This is petty. No, I said quietly. What was petty was lying to a restaurant to make me look generous in front of your friends. What was petty was assuming I wouldn't notice thousands of dollars missing. What was petty was telling the waiter I'd already agreed to cover it, when I didn't even know the reservation existed until the morning of. Dad's face was turning red now. You want to sue your own family over a couple of dinners and some bills. It's not about the money, I said. It's about respect, and boundaries, and consequences. I let that hang in the air. Then I delivered the real blow. I've also compiled everything into a report I'll be submitting to the family's accountant, I said. Because I know you've been using my name on certain shared assets, like the condo utilities, the internet at Brielle's place, the auto insurance under my old policy. Mom's eyes widened. Brielle sat up straighter. You wouldn't. I would, I said. And I did. And Uncle Martin's already seen a copy. Dad nearly choked. You brought Martin into this. He asked me if I needed support. I said simply. So I gave him the facts. And he's choosing to believe them. Silence fell over the table. I waited. Then I leaned back in my chair. You have 2 weeks to pay me back. Quietly. No drama. No smear campaigns. No guilt-tripping texts. If I get even one family means forgiveness email, the court filings go public. Mom looked like she'd been slapped. Brielle's hands were shaking. You're blowing this up over nothing. You don't get to decide what nothing means to me anymore, I said. That's the problem. And then I stood up. Slowly. Deliberately. I'll let you finish your tea, I said, turning toward the door. But just know, this wasn't revenge. I looked over my shoulder. This was accountability. The fallout came fast. 3 days later, the full repayment landed in my account. Every penny. No note. No apology. Just the money. I half expected some final message. A dramatic call. A tearful voicemail. But instead, the family went quiet. Not like before, when the silence was loaded with guilt and tension. This was different. This was a void. They stopped posting pictures of family dinners on Facebook. Brielle deleted our last group photo from her Instagram. Evan, who had been silent since the night of the restaurant, never even reached out. I guess someone filled him in. Uncle Martin sent me a text. Well done, kid. About time someone popped that bubble. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing their approval. I wasn't cleaning up their messes. I wasn't apologizing for holding up a mirror to people who couldn't handle their own reflections. I was just me. Lucas. Whole. Unapologetic. Free. And the next time someone tries to use love like a leash, I'll be the one holding the scissors. I'm Alex, 28 years old, and if you asked my family to describe me, you'd probably get a chorus of sighs, dismissive chuckles, and a few half-hearted attempts to change the subject. I was always the quiet one, the dreamer that does even have a job guy. And for most of my life, I let them say whatever they wanted, kept my head down, and focused on building something they'd never understand. But this year's family reunion? That's the day everything changed, though they didn't know it when I walked in. Every July, our extended family gathers at my Aunt Melinda's country estate for what they like to call a reunion, but what has always felt more like a performance. A show where everyone competes to see who's the most successful, who's raising the brightest kids, who bought the newest car, who married best. I stopped going for a while. 3 years, to be exact. But this year I showed up. On time. Alone. Wearing a navy blazer and jeans. Casual but clean. Neutral. Unthreatening. Just the way they like to remember me. As soon as I stepped onto the stone pathway leading to the back patio, I heard it. Laughter. The clink of wine glasses. That over-rehearsed tone people use when they want to sound important. The voices pulled me in like a trap I already knew too well. I scanned the crowd for a familiar face and locked eyes with my dad first. His reaction was almost comical. A blink of surprise, a raised eyebrow, and then that tight, practiced smile I've seen since I was a kid. The one that says, "Oh, you're still around?" He waved me over with the same tone he might use to summon the waiter at a steakhouse. "There he is," he announced to the group like I was the late arrival to a charity gala. "Our wandering philosopher has returned." People chuckled, especially my Uncle Greg, who's always been the unofficial MC of these things, always narrating everyone's life like he's hosting a game show. I gave a polite smile and nodded to the group. I wasn't going to bite yet. Not until I had to. My sister, Veronica, walked over holding a wine glass with her usual smirk, the kind of smirk that survived 2 divorces, 1 failed law firm, and a TikTok-famous teenage daughter she can't control. "Look at you," she said, eyeing my clothes. "At least you showed up without asking for money this time." I laughed softly. "Nice to see you too, Veronica." We made small talk, about the weather, about her kids, about nothing really, until dinner started being served. We sat around the enormous outdoor table draped in white linen, surrounded by ivy-covered trellises and pretentious centerpieces. Everyone had their assigned seats. I was next to my cousin Brandon, who spent half the meal bragging about the startup job he landed thanks to Uncle Greg, and across from me sat my parents, my dad nursing a scotch, while my mom tapped her phone under the table, scrolling Instagram like she couldn't care less. The moment I'd been waiting for arrived during dessert. My dad stood up, tapping his spoon against his wine glass. "Let's make a toast," he said, the way he always does after a couple drinks. He gestured dramatically around the table. "To family, to success, and to those of us who worked hard, made something of ourselves, and didn't just float through life." He paused and looked directly at me. "Let's toast to the kid who still hasn't done anything worth mentioning." A wave of silence rippled across the table, followed by a few forced chuckles. My throat tightened, but I kept my expression calm. My mom didn't even look up. Veronica leaned in and added with her signature sneer, "At least he showed up without asking for money this time." It was the kind of moment that could have broken me 5 years ago. Back then, I would have swallowed the lump in my throat, excused myself, and left early, driving home with my fists clenched and my stomach churning. But not this time. I didn't flinch. I just laughed. A slow, genuine laugh. Not loud, not dramatic, just amused. And then I reached for the buttons on my jacket. That was the moment. The shift. The crack in the atmosphere, like the air itself was holding its breath. I undid the top button, then the second, and slowly pulled the lapels apart to reveal the black and silver logo on my chest. A simple, clean emblem. The emblem of Morningside Systems. At first, no one said anything, because most of them didn't recognize it. Not right away, but Veronica did. Her eyes widened. Her glass slipped slightly in her hand. Brandon stared for a second, then choked on his wine. Uncle Greg squinted. "Is that? Wait. And my dad?" He blinked. Once. Twice. Then leaned forward with a scowl. "What is this? Some kind of joke?" I looked at him. "I closed on the acquisition last week. Full buyout. Morningside Systems is mine now." Brandon's fork hit the plate. Veronica's mouth opened, but no words came out. "I didn't want to say anything," I added calmly, "because I figured today was about family, not business. But since we're making toasts..." And then I stopped. Let the silence stretch. My heart was pounding, not from nerves, but from the quiet thrill of finally getting to flip the script. The company they all work for. The one Uncle Greg manages operations for. The one Veronica has a cushy PR job in. The one Brandon brags about nonstop. And the one my dad retired from, riding on connections and handshakes and nepotism. They didn't know. Not until now. And I hadn't even told them the rest. Not yet. The moment hung in the air like a held breath. No one knew what to say, or maybe they just didn't know what version of themselves to be. I watched the realization ripple across each of their faces like a slow, creeping tide. For years, I'd been the one they laughed at, the one they whispered about in kitchens and car rides home. I'd walked out of college to chase an unrealistic dream, and to them, that made me a punchline. And now, Here I was, sitting at the same table, in the same chair they always made me feel small in, wearing the future on my chest. My father's voice finally broke the silence. You expect us to believe you bought Morningside? He scoffed, eyes narrowing. The same look he used to give me when I came home with scraped knees or late report cards. You couldn't afford a used car 2 years ago. I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was exactly what I expected. You're right, I said, my voice calm. 2 years ago I couldn't. But that's when my third app got acquired. Things changed after that. He stared at me like I was speaking another language. My mom finally looked up from her phone, her brow slightly furrowed, like she was just tuning into a movie halfway through and didn't like the plot twist. You wrote code? My cousin Brandon muttered, still not fully grasping it. But weren't you delivering groceries or something? Sure, I replied, in between coding sessions and investor pitches. I didn't have rent help or family connections. I had to hustle. My sister snorted, reaching for her wine. So you got lucky. That's not the same as earning it. Funny, I said, tilting my head, because the board I just replaced seems to disagree. That one hit hard. I could practically feel the tension thicken around the table. Brandon looked like he'd been slapped. My uncle Greg cleared his throat and leaned forward. You didn't seriously buy controlling shares, he said, trying to sound casual. That's not how this works. You need backing, boards, stakeholders. That takes years. It does, I said with a shrug. Took me 5. But when your CTO leaks internal inefficiencies and you're already planning a competing platform, things move faster than you'd think. Especially when your product outperforms theirs and you use your leverage to convince the shareholders it's time for a change. My mom blinked. You mean you started your own company? I did. And I merged it with Morningside last week. They didn't even know who was behind the buyout until the contracts were signed. Pretty clean, really. Greg was turning red now. That company is our legacy. No, I said, leaning in. It was your playground. You passed around positions like party favors. Meanwhile, the people doing the real work, the engineers, the interns, the developers, got ignored. That ends now. I could see my dad's jaw tighten. That simmering, quiet rage he always tried to keep just below the surface when he didn't have control over a conversation. So what now, he asked. You come here to gloat? No, I said, pausing. I came because you invited me. I wasn't planning on saying anything. But you started it, like you always do. Veronica slammed her glass down. You think this makes you better than us? I didn't answer right away. I just looked around the table, at the people who had mocked me, underestimated me, used me for years as a living example of what not to become. All because I hadn't followed their version of success. I don't think I'm better, I said finally. I think I worked harder. I think I built something while you were busy pretending I didn't matter. And now, I get to decide how this company runs, and who gets to stay in it. The silence that followed was different this time. Not shocked, but scared. Brandon's expression shifted from confusion to panic. Veronica's smirk disappeared. And Uncle Greg, usually so loud and performative, suddenly looked very, very still. Wait, my mom said, her voice tight. You wouldn't. You're not going to fire your own family. I looked at her for a long moment. You're assuming I still consider you family. And that was when Brandon stood up, knocking over his chair. You can't do this. I've worked there for 3 years. I know people. They'll never let you get away with. Brandon, I interrupted, still seated, still calm. You were a diversity hire Greg pushed through HR without credentials. I've seen the reports. You've missed 16 deadlines in the last year. I didn't have to do anything. The system you all created, the one built on favors instead of merit, is collapsing under its own weight. He looked like he might cry. Good. Across from me, my dad's hands clenched the tablecloth. You come into my house. No, I cut him off again. You invited me to a reunion. You raised a glass and toasted to my failure. I just brought the facts. I slowly stood up, brushing the jacket back over the logo as I straightened. I'm not here to humiliate you, I said, but I am here to make one thing clear. You don't get to define me anymore. Not with your toasts, not with your silence, not with your smug little jokes. And then I reached into my pocket and pulled out a manila envelope, not thick, not flashy, just paper. I laid it gently on the center of the table and tapped it once. Greg eyed it. What's that? A courtesy, I said. Inside are preliminary transition memos, departmental reviews, new leadership structures. You'll want to read them closely. I turned to walk away. And just before I reached the edge of the patio, I heard my dad's voice, colder than I'd ever heard it before. You think you're the big man now? You'll always be that boy who couldn't make the team. You'll always be. I stopped walking. I didn't turn around. I just said, loud enough for everyone to hear. Then it must be killing you to realize your job depends on that boy now. And I kept walking. I didn't look back as I walked down the driveway, past the row of polished cars they'd all parked like trophies. Dad's obnoxious red convertible, Veronica's leased SUV with the vanity plate, Greg's ridiculous black truck that had never once seen a construction site. The gravel crunched beneath my shoes in a rhythm that matched my pulse, steady but alive. For the first time in years, maybe ever, I wasn't walking away in shame or silence. I was walking away in full control. By the time I reached my rental car, a plain black sedan I'd chosen on purpose, something neutral, forgettable, my phone buzzed. Once, twice, then a dozen more times. I didn't even need to check who it was. I slid the phone into the console and sat for a minute with the engine off, just letting the air settle. The sun had begun to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the road. I stared straight ahead, not smiling, not angry, just still. It was surreal, in a way. That house, that table, those people. For so long, they had felt like the center of the universe. Like their opinions defined my worth. Their approval, or lack of it, was oxygen. And for years, I'd been gasping. But now I realized they were just noise. Background static in a life I'd already built without them. Still, I wasn't stupid. I knew this wasn't over. I knew what that envelope would set in motion. Sure enough, when I finally checked my phone, the messages were pouring in. Dad, what is this supposed to mean? Greg, you're bluffing. We'll talk Monday. Brandon, you wouldn't actually fire me, right? I can fix this. Whatever it is. Mom, please call me. Your father is furious. Don't do something you'll regret. Veronica, wow. Real mature, Alex. You know what? You've always been jealous. You just found a way to play dirty. I let the screen dim. No response. Not yet. Let them sit in it. The next morning, the real panic began. I timed it perfectly. My legal team sent the formal restructure notices at 9:01 a.m. Department heads were informed of new reporting lines. Executive review audits were triggered, not by me personally, but by the internal oversight panel I'd installed during the merger. A few of the names on the audit list were, unsurprisingly, sitting at that reunion table the night before. By 10:15, Greg had emailed me directly. A full-page rant about betrayal, family legacy, and crossing lines. I skimmed it, flagged it for my legal team, and archived it. At 11:02, HR forwarded me a resignation letter from Veronica. It was short. No apology. Just a calculated exit, the kind someone sends when they think they can beat you to the punch. By noon, my mom had called 4 times. I didn't pick up. She tried texting instead. Whatever you think you're doing, just remember we're your family. This company is all we have. I stared at that message for a while. All we have. Funny how they'd never considered me part of that equation until now. Until I had the power to take it away. But it wasn't about revenge. Not really. I wasn't trying to humiliate them, at least not at first. I was just trying to hold them accountable. I gave them something they never gave me, the benefit of the doubt, a chance to act with dignity. They didn't take it. And so, things escalated. On Wednesday, Brandon showed up unannounced at my office building. He didn't make it past the front desk. My assistant called ahead to ask if I wanted to let him up. I said no, but I watched the security footage later. He looked lost, like a kid who'd lost his mom in the grocery store. On Thursday, Uncle Greg scheduled a shareholder emergency meeting. He tried to challenge the merger, tried to rally the old board against me. He failed. Every document had been airtight, every vote accounted for, every move backed by performance metrics that made the old regime look lazy, outdated, and incompetent. They didn't just lose. They watched themselves lose. And then, on Friday morning, I got a call from my dad. He hadn't called in years. Not even when I was in the hospital with a collapsed lung 2 years ago. Not when I launched my first app. Not when I moved cities or changed numbers. Not when I won the innovation grant that got me national press. But now he needed something. I let the phone ring until voicemail picked up. He didn't leave one. But 20 minutes later, I got a message. It wasn't a paragraph. It wasn't even a sentence. Just 2 words. Let's talk. No punctuation. No warmth. It was like a man trying to put out a fire without admitting he ever lit the match. I didn't respond. Not right away. I needed to think. Because part of me, the kid who used to sit outside his office door waiting to be noticed, still wanted him to say more. Still wanted to hear, just once, "I'm proud of you." But another part of me, the man I'd become, knew better. This wasn't pride. This was fear. Because for the first time in his life, I was the one holding the door. And he didn't know if I was going to open it. I waited 3 days before calling him back. Not because I was trying to be dramatic, though, I'll admit, the silence probably got under his skin, but because I needed to be sure. I had spent years craving his approval, begging for scraps of validation. I needed to know that when I finally spoke to him again, it wasn't from that same place of need. I had to be done with all that. So on Monday morning, I called. He picked up on the first ring. "Hello." His voice sounded cautious, like he was testing the air. "It's me," I said simply. There was a pause. Then he cleared his throat. "I didn't think you'd call back." "I wasn't sure I would," I replied. "But you wanted to talk." He exhaled slowly, like he was buying time. Then he dove right in. "Look, Alex, I know things got a little out of hand at the reunion. I probably shouldn't have made that joke. Or said what I said. Probably, I thought. Not exactly an apology. And I didn't know about the merger," he went on. "I didn't know what you'd been building. We were surprised." I said nothing. "I guess what I'm trying to say is, we were wrong about you," he said finally. "I was wrong." I waited for the usual follow-up, the "but" that always came next. "But you should have told us." "But you didn't have to embarrass us." "But you've changed." But it never came. It was strange. Without the "but," his words felt weightless, like they weren't tethered to any real remorse. Just floating, waiting to be accepted. "I appreciate you saying that," I said, keeping my tone flat. "But I wasn't looking for an apology. I just wanted you to see me clearly." "Is that what all this was?" he asked. "Some kind of power move?" "No," I said. "This was me doing what you never thought I could. Or should." He didn't respond. After a beat, he said, "You know your Uncle Greg's trying to get the board to overturn the restructuring. He thinks you're being vindictive." I laughed. "Greg's lucky I didn't fire him outright." "He's panicking," my dad admitted. "They all are. HR reports, audits. They don't know what to do." "They do now," I replied. "They just don't like that it's not them making the rules anymore." Silence again. Then, softly, he asked, "So, where does that leave me?" I stared out the window. My office overlooked the city skyline, sun breaking through the clouds, catching on the glass towers. It looked nothing like the world I grew up in. It looked like mine. "You're retired," I said, "and nothing's changed there. But if I wanted to come back in some capacity..." "No," I said, cutting him off. "You won't be coming back." His voice hardened. "You're really going to shut me out?" "No. You shut me out. For years. And now you're just living with the consequences." He let out a bitter laugh. "So this is revenge?" "No," I said. "This is me protecting what I built. The way you protected your image, your circle, your comfort, at my expense. You all made your choices. You toasted to my failure. You humiliated me at every opportunity. And now, I'm just drawing the line." There was another long pause. "You're making a mistake, Alex." I smiled. "I've heard that before." And I ended the call. After that, things moved quickly. Veronica's resignation was accepted, and not gracefully. She tried to walk out with 2 company laptops and a Rolodex of contacts she didn't realize had already been flagged for deletion. Greg tried to undermine one of the transition teams and was quietly removed from his position by the oversight committee I had empowered. Brandon, HR offered him a performance improvement plan, but he walked out instead. His email account was disabled within the hour. I didn't take joy in any of it. That's the part people misunderstand. This wasn't about some movie-style vengeance. I wasn't rubbing my hands together, waiting to gloat. It was just necessary, like cauterizing a wound. You don't do it because you enjoy it. You do it so the rest of the body doesn't rot. In the weeks that followed, things finally started to settle. The company, freed from the clutches of nepotism and backroom deals, began to thrive. Teams were more motivated. Managers were more accountable. Even the junior staff, the ones who had always been overlooked, started stepping up in ways I hadn't anticipated. I held one-on-one meetings with every department head. I listened. I implemented suggestions. I made sure no one ever felt like I had, voiceless in a room full of people pretending to care. And then, one afternoon, something strange happened. I got a letter in the mail. A real letter. Handwritten. Neat cursive on thick cream paper. No return address, just my name on the front. I opened it slowly. It was from my mom. Alex, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't expect a reply. I just want you to know something I should have said a long time ago. I was silent for too many years. When your father mocked you, I looked away. When your sister belittled you, I said nothing. I told myself I was staying out of it, but really, I was just a coward. You didn't deserve that. You never did. I hope one day you can forgive me, or at least know that I see you now. Fully, proudly, your mother. I sat there for a long time, the letter resting in my lap, the words sinking in like slow rain. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. It didn't erase everything. It didn't fix the years I'd spent carrying their disappointment like a second skin. But it mattered. In a quiet, unexpected way, it mattered. And maybe that was enough. Months passed. The reunion photos faded from everyone's social media. The whispers stopped. My name stopped being the punchline. Instead, it became the header of the internal newsletter. The name on the new corporate letterhead. The one interns spoke about with curiosity. The one competitors took seriously. Sometimes, when I'm in the elevator or grabbing coffee in the lobby, someone will stop me, an employee, a client, even a former exec, and say, "You're Alex, right? The new guy who turned everything around." I smile. "Not new," I say. "Just finally seen." And as for the next family reunion, let's just say the invitation came in the mail. I RSVP'd no, and sent a donation to the event caterer instead, anonymously, of course. Because even when you're done with the past, it doesn't hurt to leave a little reminder of who you've become. The kind of reminder they can't toast over. The kind they'll never forget. My name's Cole. I'm 29, a software engineer by trade, and an extremely reluctant participant in family reunions. Not because I hate my family exactly. It's more complicated than that. Growing up, I was the sensitive one. That's what my mom used to call me when I cried after being left out. When my sister, Natalie, got a brand new piano and private lessons while I was handed a dusty secondhand guitar and told to be creative, I remember choking back tears and being told, "Cole, not everything's about you." But it was never about me, was it? Natalie is 2 years younger than me. Blonde, charming, and frankly brilliant at playing people like a violin. She was the kind of girl who'd break a vase, cry before anyone could accuse her, and have me grounded for it. My parents never saw it. Or maybe they did and didn't care. Either way, growing up with Natalie was like being cast as the extra in a movie about her life. I wasn't the villain or the sidekick. I was just there. Invisible. Only noticed when I messed something up. I was 7 when I noticed the difference for the first time. It was Christmas morning, and I had begged for a Lego space station set. I got socks. Natalie got a Barbie dream house and a matching pink scooter. She was 5. I remember thinking maybe Santa just forgot me. I actually asked my mom if I'd been bad that year. She didn't answer. She just said, "Well, Natalie's younger. She believes in the magic. Don't ruin that for her." That was the beginning of a pattern that never stopped. Summer vacation? She got art camp in France. I got 2 weeks at Uncle Larry's house watching his dog while he was in Vegas. When she turned 16, they gifted her a used BMW. When I turned 16, I got a lecture on building character through work and was handed a mop at my dad's friend's hardware store. Still, I tried not to let it define me. I buried myself in books, taught myself to code off free YouTube tutorials, and saved for a cheap laptop by fixing broken bikes around the neighborhood. My parents didn't really ask what I was doing. They just assumed I was glued to screens again. But screens were my sanctuary. Somewhere in that lonely little world of error codes and late-night forum posts, I found clarity, solace, control. By the time I hit college, I'd already built 2 simple apps that made a few $100 a month in ad revenue. Nothing life-changing, but enough for groceries and the occasional greasy pizza after midnight coding marathons. Meanwhile, Natalie was in her first year at NYU, majoring in media psychology. Don't ask me what that is. I don't think she ever knew either. Posting avocado toast photos and shopping for fall fashion in Soho on weekends, courtesy of our parents' emergency credit card. She called me once to complain her roommate was annoying. I was in the middle of debugging a crash that could have lost my freelance client thousands. I told her I was busy. She cried, told mom, and I got a passive-aggressive email asking why I can't be more supportive of my sister when she's clearly having a tough time adjusting. Still, I kept my head down, kept building, kept improving. I didn't show off, didn't post flashy Instagram updates, didn't brag at family dinners. I didn't want to start a war. My therapist calls it peacekeeping. I call it survival. My parents didn't come to my college graduation. Natalie had a very important networking brunch the same weekend. Apparently, she cried when she thought she might miss it. So, Mom and Dad flew to New York to support her. I got a card in the mail. No cash. Just, we're proud of you. Let's celebrate soon. We never did. After college, things got worse. Not for me. Ironically, that's when my life really started. I landed a remote job at a mid-sized tech firm. Started consulting on the side. Built a reputation quietly. Kept my face out of things. By 26, I'd launched my own software platform and gotten my first angel investor. By 27, we were doing $2 million in revenue. Now, at 29, we're valued at $10 million. I own the majority stake. No press. No interviews. Just quiet domination from a rented apartment above a coffee shop where nobody knew my last name. My parents still thought I worked in IT. They told people I fixed computers and that Cole's into all that techie stuff. Natalie, she was a consultant now, which meant she had an Instagram account and a few sponsors for hair vitamins and energy drinks. She'd call me sometimes for career advice, but really, it was just to vent about how her brand engagement was down or how her new condo's lighting made her look pale on camera. Oh right, they bought her a condo. At 22. For $100,000. Downtown. Furnished. Paid in full. When I asked, just once, out of curiosity, why they didn't help me out with rent when I was sleeping on a friend's futon after my internship, my dad looked confused and said, "You never asked." That stung. But again, I let it go. I always let it go. Then came the retirement party. Dad was stepping down from his company. He was a regional director at some manufacturing firm, and they were throwing him a big event. Classy venue, 3-course meal, extended family invited. I wasn't planning to go, but Mom insisted. Said it was important to your father, and everyone's going to be there. Which, in our family, meant mostly people who hadn't seen me since I was 12 and still thought I had asthma and a lisp. I went. Wore a navy suit I hadn't pulled out in years. Polished my shoes. Practiced smiling in the mirror. The venue was nicer than I expected. Chandeliers, cocktail bar, jazz trio playing softly in the background. People buzzed around like bees in a hive. Natalie was there early, of course, already taking selfies in the garden courtyard. She wore a champagne-colored dress that probably cost more than my first car. "Cole," she squealed when she saw me, as if I was some lost puppy. "You look so grown up." "I'm 29, Nat," I said, trying to keep it light. "Right?" She laughed, looping her arm through mine. "Isn't it crazy how fast time goes?" She introduced me to her influencer friends, 2 girls with perfect makeup and a guy named Skylar who wore sunglasses indoors. I smiled politely. They asked what I did. Before I could answer, Natalie chimed in with, "Oh, Cole's like, in computers or something. He fixes stuff." That again. I opened my mouth to correct her, but something in my chest locked up. Not because I was ashamed, but because, why bother? What was the point? They weren't listening. They never had. The night went on. Speeches were made. Toasts raised. My dad looked genuinely happy, and for a second, I was glad I came. Then someone, I think it was my cousin Leah, asked what I was up to these days. I smiled. "Still running my company. We've grown a lot." "Oh cool," she said. "Like a startup?" "Yeah. Tech-focused. Mostly automation software. We just crossed 8 figures in valuation." The table went quiet for a second. Natalie blinked. "Wait, what?" I shrugged. "Yeah, we're doing pretty well." She frowned. "You're lying." I turned toward her. "Why would I lie?" "Because you're not, like, that kind of person." That stung more than I expected. I wasn't sure what she meant, but I had a feeling she meant everything I feared. Not charismatic enough, not bold enough, not special enough. Not her. Actually, a voice piped up from behind me. He's not lying. It was my Aunt Marie, my mom's younger sister. She was holding her phone and a folded piece of newspaper. She looked smug. "I meant to bring this earlier," she said, handing the paper to my dad. "Thought you'd want to see what your IT guy son's been up to." My heart dropped. I hadn't done any press. We'd agreed to stay lean, low profile, silent partners only. But a few weeks ago, one of our clients gave a glowing interview and mentioned us by name. Apparently, some local business paper picked it up. I watched as my dad unfolded the clipping and read the headline. Then Natalie snatched it from his hands, skimmed it, and turned red. "You didn't tell us?" she hissed. "You let me introduce you to Skylar like you were some computer nerd?" I stared at her. "I am a computer nerd." "No," she snapped. "You're a liar." The room had gone dead silent. My mom's expression was unreadable. My dad looked like he'd just realized the earth was flat. And that's when my aunt said something that flipped everything upside down. "You know what's funny?" she said, sipping her wine. "Cole never bragged, never asked for anything, never even mentioned he was the CEO of a company worth $10 million. Meanwhile, you guys were busy buying Natalie condos and calling him too sensitive." That was the moment everything shifted. And that was just the beginning. You could hear a pin drop after Aunt Marie's little mic drop moment. The silence felt thick, like everyone at the table was suddenly reevaluating everything they thought they knew about me. I didn't say anything. I just sat there, letting them marinate in the truth for once. No interruptions. No jokes to smooth it over. Just the cold, undeniable reality that their quiet, sensitive, IT-fixing Cole had been building an empire while they were too busy uploading Natalie's brunch pics and cheering her on for landing another teeth-whitening brand deal. I didn't mean for it to come out like that. I wasn't trying to rub anything in anyone's face. Honestly, if Aunt Marie hadn't brought that newspaper clipping, I probably would have left that party unnoticed, as usual, slipping out the side door before dessert. But something changed that night. Not in me. I'd already done the work to find my peace, but in them. For the first time in my entire life, I wasn't the afterthought. And Natalie hated that. She stormed off before the cake was even cut, dragging her purse behind her like a wounded animal. Skylar and her other influencer friends awkwardly followed, murmuring something about traffic and lighting. My mom gave me a tight-lipped smile, and my dad just stared at the clipping like it was written in a foreign language. I didn't stick around much longer. I thanked Aunt Marie, gave a nod to a few stunned relatives, and went home. But that wasn't the end of it. Not even close. The text started the next morning. "Mom, can we talk later today? Your sister's very upset. Dad, you blindsided us. I don't understand why you kept this from your family. Natalie, you think you're so clever. Running your little secret company behind our backs? Pathetic." That last one made me laugh. Secret company? What did she think I was doing all this time, selling Wi-Fi passwords on the dark web? I ignored the messages for a couple of days. I needed space. And honestly, I figured they'd cool off. But I underestimated just how much Natalie hated not being the center of attention. She showed up at my place 3 days later. Now, you have to understand, I live in a small loft above a coffee shop in the arts district. It's cozy, minimalist. I like it, but it's not flashy. No doorman, no valet, just a keypad and a creaky stairwell that smells like espresso and old paint. So when I heard someone aggressively banging on the glass downstairs while I was on a Zoom call with my dev team, I muted myself and peeked out the window. And there she was, full glam, designer heels, furious expression, pounding on the door like I'd stolen her dog. I buzzed her in reluctantly. She didn't wait for me to say a word, just marched up the stairs, tossed her purse on my table, and started in. "You humiliated me, Cole." I raised an eyebrow. "Nice to see you too. Don't do that. Don't pretend like you didn't orchestrate that whole thing. You let me introduce you like a loser in front of my friends. You sat there smugly while Aunt Marie made me look like a narcissistic brat." I folded my arms. "You didn't need any help looking like that." "Wrong thing to say?" Her face twisted. "I've always supported you," she said, her voice rising. "I've always tried to include you, even when you didn't fit in. Even when you were weird or awkward or just, you. Wow. Thanks for that glowing endorsement." "You know what I mean," she snapped. "You could have told us. You could have at least warned me before letting me embarrass myself." I stared at her. This was surreal. Not once did she stop to ask how I'd gotten here. Not once did she ask about my business, my journey, my struggles. It was all about her. Her image. Her feelings. Her embarrassment. "I didn't tell you because I knew this is exactly how you'd react," I said calmly. "You'd make it about you." She scoffed. "You really think you're better than me now, don't you?" "No," I said quietly. "But I don't think you're better than me anymore. That's the difference." That shut her up. For a second, she grabbed her purse, muttered something under her breath, and stormed out. 2 hours later, I got a call from my mom. "Cole," she began. with that tone that always made me feel like I was 5 and in trouble for something I didn't do. Your sister came to see you. She's very upset. She's always upset, I said flatly. She's just emotional. You know how she is. But this whole thing has really thrown her off. You should have told us. Why? I asked. So you could shrug and say, "That's nice, honey," before asking how Natalie's new podcast is going. She didn't respond. I didn't tell you because I learned not to expect anything from you. I continued. You made it pretty clear growing up who the priority was. That's not fair, isn't it? There was a long silence on the line. Then, your father and I worked hard to support both of you. No, I said. You worked hard to support her. I supported myself. I hung up. That conversation left a pit in my stomach for days. Not because I regretted what I said. I didn't. But because it confirmed something I'd always suspected but never admitted. I was the backup plan, the emotional sponge, the fallback. And somewhere deep down, I think I'd hoped one day they'd look at me and finally see me. That hope was gone now. But the real betrayal? That came a week later. It started with a phone call from my CFO. We'll call her Janet. She's sharp, no nonsense, and not easily rattled. But she sounded shaken. Cole, she said, we have a situation. Apparently, someone had emailed one of our partners using a spoof version of my company email. The message contained a fake invoice and instructions to wire a large sum to a new account. Luckily, the partner flagged it and called us before sending anything. But the message was convincing. Personal. It referenced real details that only someone close to me would know. We did an internal trace. It didn't come from inside the company. The IP was masked, but not well. Janet's guy traced it to an apartment complex downtown. Natalie's condo. I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. At first, I didn't want to believe it. I told myself it could be a coincidence. Maybe someone in her building. Maybe she was hacked. But the more we dug, the more connections we found. Old emails she'd sent me with similar phrasing, photos she'd taken of my laptop when I wasn't paying attention, little breadcrumbs that pointed in one very ugly direction. I didn't tell my parents. Not yet. I wasn't ready. Instead, I went to see her. She opened the door wearing a silk robe, holding a smoothie, clearly surprised to see me. Cole, what? I held up my phone. We need to talk. Now. And I swear, the way her expression shifted, just for a second, told me everything. Guilt, panic, then defiance. She let me in. I know what you did, I said. The fake invoice. The spoofed email. We traced it. She didn't deny it. Instead, she set her smoothie down and said, You made me look like a joke in front of our entire family. I blinked. So you tried to rob me? You humiliated me, she yelled. I've been the one carrying this family's image for years. I'm the one they talk about. I'm the one they count on. And you just, what? Show up out of nowhere like some genius CEO and act like you're better than us. I never said that. You didn't have to, she snapped. They all saw it. Aunt Marie, Uncle Doug, even Dad. For the first time in your life, you were the favorite. And you know what? You loved it. I was stunned. I wasn't even angry. Just tired. You're right, I said finally. For one night, I did love it. Not because I wanted to be the favorite, but because I wanted to matter. That shut her up. I turned to leave, but paused at the door. I'm not pressing charges, I said quietly. But you're cut off. Don't call me. Don't ask for favors. Whatever relationship we had, it's done. She didn't respond. Just stared at me like I'd slapped her. And I walked out. That was the moment everything changed. And trust me, the fallout was just beginning. After I walked out of Natalie's condo, something in me cracked, but not in the way you might think. It wasn't rage. It wasn't heartbreak. It was something quieter, something duller. It was like a door I had been holding open for 29 years finally creaked shut. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel like I had to keep propping it open just in case they finally looked through it and saw me standing there. But even though I said I was done, part of me still hoped for some acknowledgement. An apology. A moment of clarity from my parents, where they might call and say, We're sorry we didn't listen. We're sorry we didn't believe in you. But the call never came. Instead, I got silence. Well, except from Natalie. She posted a vague Instagram story 2 days later. A black screen with white text that said, Betrayal is worse when it comes from someone who pretended to love you. Tag no one. But let's not kid ourselves. It didn't need to be tagged. She knew exactly what she was doing. The comments poured in. Her followers went into full poor baby mode. People were guessing wildly. A cheating boyfriend? A backstabbing best friend? Someone even wrote, "Whoever did this to you doesn't deserve you. Cut them off, queen." That one stung, because I had cut her off. And suddenly, I was the villain in her story. But the worst part wasn't the social media nonsense. It was what came next. A week later, I got a call from my dad. Not a warm one. Not a fatherly, let's talk kind of call. Just cold and clipped. "I heard about what happened with Natalie," he said. "From her or from someone who wasn't trying to manipulate you?" I asked. There was a long pause. "I don't know what's going on between you two," he said finally. "But she's family. And she's hurting." I almost laughed. So I should just what? Forget that she tried to steal from me? Lie to my business partners? Ruin my company? "She made a mistake," he said. "No," I snapped. "A mistake is spilling coffee on a client's shirt. A mistake is showing up late. She orchestrated fraud." Another pause. "I just don't want the family to fall apart," he said, quieter this time. "Not over this." That's when I realized how deep it went. My dad, this man who had always prided himself on structure, discipline, consequences, was ready to look past what Natalie did just to keep the peace. Or, more likely, to preserve her image. Because in our family, Natalie wasn't just a daughter. She was the sun. Everything else orbited around her. That night, I sat in the dark, staring at my ceiling, and felt it hit me all at once. This wasn't just about Natalie anymore. This was about a lifetime of being the runner-up. The shadow. The fallback plan. I thought I'd come to terms with that years ago. But it turns out, some wounds just bury themselves deeper. You think you're healed until something rips the stitches open. And I bled. Quietly. Privately. I stopped eating well. Stopped sleeping. Missed 2 team meetings. Janet called and asked if I was okay, and I gave her the classic lie. Just a bit burnt out. I'll bounce back soon. But I didn't bounce back. I spiraled. For the first time in years, I felt powerless. Natalie had always had power over our family, over me. And even now, when she was the one who crossed the line, she still got to be the one comforted, the one believed, the one defended. I didn't want revenge. Not yet. I just wanted to disappear. So I did. I booked a last-minute flight to Oregon, where my college roommate, Dylan, lived with his husband. They'd invited me dozens of times over the years. Come stay for a week. Get out of the grind. Unplug. I'd always said no, too busy. This time, I said yes. When I arrived, Dylan didn't ask questions. Just handed me a beer, pointed to the couch, and said, "We've got the office queued up and too much Thai food. Your room's upstairs when you're ready to crash." I stayed for 10 days. We hiked. We grilled burgers. We watched bad movies and made dumb jokes, and, eventually, I started sleeping through the night again. One evening, Dylan and I were sitting by the fire pit, and I finally told him everything. About Natalie, the company, the fake invoice, the way my parents responded. He didn't say much at first. Just let me talk. Then he leaned back in his chair, stared up at the stars, and said, "You know what your problem is?" I raised an eyebrow. "Do tell. You're still waiting for them to clap for you." That hit like a brick. "Dude," he continued, "you've already built something amazing. You made it. Not because of them. In spite of them. And now you're stuck waiting for the people who never showed up to suddenly realize they missed the show." I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because he was right. That night, I opened my laptop for the first time in days. Not to check emails. Not to update our roadmap. But just to write. Not code. Just thoughts. I wrote about being the forgotten kid. About growing up with a sister who sparkled and a family who only saw the glitter. About what it felt like to realize you were only ever loved for your silence. And I kept writing. It turned into a long post. Not angry. Not bitter. Just honest. I didn't name names. Didn't mention my company. Just talked about growing up in someone else's spotlight and learning to find your own glow in the shadows. On a whim, I posted it on a small Medium blog I used back in college. I figured maybe a few people would read it. Maybe not. By morning, it had 25,000 views. By the end of the week, 200,000. People started sharing their own stories in the comments. Siblings who were always second best. Daughters labeled too dramatic, while their brothers got a free pass. Sons like me, who learned to live quietly because their voice never mattered. It went viral. Somewhere along the way, a tech journalist picked it up. Wrote a piece titled "The Quiet Founders. What We Miss When We Only Celebrate the Loud." They linked to my company, finally naming it. And just like that, the phone started ringing. Investors, partners, even a university that wanted me to guest lecture. It was overwhelming, but for the first time, I didn't feel like I was pretending to be someone else. I wasn't Cole the backup. I was just Cole, the guy who built something real. Back in the office, Janet was grinning when I returned. "You broke our traffic records," she said, holding up her tablet. "From a blog post?" I asked. "From you. We updated the website. Added a letter from the founders section. My story, my words, my voice. And something changed in our company culture. People felt more connected. Like we weren't just building software. We were building something human." Meanwhile, my parents? Still silent. Until a letter showed up in the mail. Handwritten. Thick envelope. My name on the front in Mom's cursive. Inside was a 3-page letter. Apologizing. Rambling, really. Talking about how they never realized how much I'd grown. How they thought they were doing the right thing by supporting Natalie because she needed it more. How they assumed I was fine because I didn't complain. They said they were proud of me. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just folded the letter and put it in my desk drawer. Because even though it was what I had wanted for so long, I realized it wasn't enough. Words are easy. What came next? That would show me whether they truly meant it. I kept my parents' letter in the bottom drawer of my desk for weeks without reading it again. Not because I was afraid of what it said. I'd memorized every word after the third read. But because I didn't want to start believing it too soon. People say they're sorry all the time. Usually when they're afraid of losing something. And I'd spent most of my life losing their approval, piece by piece. I wasn't about to let a few neatly written paragraphs win me back. Not without actions to match. The truth is, something changed in me after Oregon. After Dylan. After the blog post. I stopped hoping to be seen and started planning how I wanted to move forward. Not just with my family, but with my story, my narrative. For once, I was in control of how this all played out. And the timing? Couldn't have been more poetic. About a month after I got back, I received a curious email from my mom. No greeting, no emotional fluff. Just a simple subject line. Dad's retirement celebration, part 2. Turns out the original retirement party wasn't enough of a send-off for my father. His old company had decided to host a larger, more public event at a local country club. One of those places with valet parking, champagne towers, and waiters who looked like they were trained at Buckingham Palace. This one was open to industry partners, clients, and a lot of influential people from my hometown. And I knew immediately that was my stage. My first instinct was to say no. Why should I go? Why should I smile and nod for the same people who thought I was a recluse or a disappointment? But that instinct faded quickly. Because this time, I didn't feel like a background character. I wasn't going to sit at the kids' table with lukewarm chicken while everyone asked Natalie about her brand partnerships. I had a plan. It started with a phone call. "Janet," I said the next morning, "how do you feel about sponsoring a tech grant for local high school students?" She laughed. "That came out of nowhere." "What?" "I've got an idea." We moved fast. Within 2 weeks, our company launched a $50,000 innovation grant for underprivileged teens who wanted to learn coding or engineering but didn't have the resources. We partnered with a local nonprofit, hired a small PR firm, and started prepping a full press release. And I timed the announcement, very deliberately, for the day before my father's gala. Now, before you think this was all about revenge, let me be clear. I wanted to help those kids. I meant every dollar of that grant. But I also wanted my name to be the one people saw in the headlines that morning. I wanted to walk into that ballroom and not have to introduce myself. I wanted them to know who I was. The day before the event, a small piece ran in the Daily Business Journal. The headline read, "Local CEO launches grant to empower next generation of tech innovators." And the subheadline? "Cole Merritt, founder of Modulus Systems, gives back to his hometown with $50,000 initiative." Simple. Clean. No drama. Just truth. I forwarded the link to Aunt Marie. She responded 5 minutes later. "Now that's the Cole I always saw. Proud of you, kid." The next day, I put on the same navy suit I'd worn to the original retirement party, added a subtle tie clip, and slipped a copy of the newspaper into my inner jacket pocket. Just in case. As I pulled into the country club parking lot, I felt oddly calm. Not angry. Not nervous. Just focused. Like everything was finally aligned. The valet took my keys, I adjusted my cufflinks, and walked through the arched doorway like I belonged there. Because this time I did. The ballroom was packed. Round tables with white linens, gold accents. People in expensive shoes sipping champagne like it was Gatorade. I saw familiar faces from old family barbecues and neighborhood block parties. But I also saw strangers, business owners, community leaders, a few journalists. And then, of course, I saw them. My parents. They stood near the center, Dad shaking hands like a politician, Mom beaming beside him. Natalie was there too, wearing a red dress that probably had its own insurance policy. She glanced up and spotted me, expression unreadable. Not a smile, not a glare, just still. I walked toward them slowly. Cole, my father said first, blinking like he wasn't quite sure I was real. Didn't expect to see you tonight. I was invited, I said simply. He cleared his throat. Right. Of course. I'm glad you're here. Natalie didn't say a word. She just sipped her drink and looked away. My mom tried. How have you been? She asked. I nodded. Busy. We've been working on a new community initiative. Oh, she asked, suddenly interested. What kind? Before I could answer, a voice behind me chimed in. You're Cole Merritt, right? The modulus guy. I turned to see a man in his 50s, silver hair, sharp suit, clearly someone important. He extended a hand. I'm Keith Wallace, he said. My nephew just applied for your grant. Brilliant move, by the way. This town needs more programs like that. Thank you, I said, shaking his hand. We're excited about it. He clapped me on the shoulder, glanced at my father, and smiled. You've raised quite a son. My dad nodded, lips pressed tight. Yes, we're very proud. That was the moment I realized something vital. Pride, when forced, is hollow. But I didn't need it anymore. More people came up. A few reporters. One asked if I had a minute to answer a question about Modulus' recent AI project. Another wanted a photo. A photo. Me, the invisible kid, being asked for a picture at my father's event. Natalie's face tightened with every interaction. At one point, I caught her standing alone near the open bar. I walked over. Congratulations, she said without looking at me. Thanks, I replied. She finally turned, eyes sharp. I guess this is your revenge. I shook my head. No, this is my beginning. She didn't answer. She just watched as another person came up and asked me for a business card. And then the moment I'd been waiting for happened. One of the event organizers tapped a spoon against a glass and asked everyone to take their seats for dinner. My dad was being honored with a speech, and the MC invited the family to sit at the head table. To my surprise, they'd left a seat for me. Not at the end. Not squeezed in. Right next to my father. I took it. The speech started with the usual accolades, years of service, company growth, yada yada. But then the speaker said something that nearly made me choke on my water. And of course, we can't talk about Mr. Merritt's legacy without acknowledging his remarkable children. Natalie Merritt, rising entrepreneur and brand strategist. The applause was polite. And his son, Cole Merritt, founder of Modulus Systems and the visionary behind this week's community tech grant. We're proud to have him here tonight. The applause was louder. And just like that, the spotlight shifted. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. But it was a taste. And in that moment, I saw everything clearly. Who they were, who I was, and how far I'd come without needing them to carry me. But I also saw something else. An opportunity. Because my dad's company? Well, let's just say I knew things. Things they never thought I paid attention to. Connections. Vulnerabilities. Quiet inefficiencies he never fixed. And thanks to a few well-timed conversations with some of his former colleagues, I had a new idea, one that might change everything. It wasn't petty. It was strategic. And it was already in motion. The night of the gala marked the first time my father looked at me like an equal. Not as the quiet, awkward backup plan or the kid who never needed anything, but as someone with power, influence, leverage. But here's the thing about being treated like you don't matter for nearly 3 decades. You learn to pay attention. You learn to notice patterns, details, weaknesses. I left that night with more than applause and a seat at the head table. I left with conversations, names, an overheard remark between 2 former executives about how the merger paperwork still hadn't gone through. A whispered joke from a vendor about those outdated security protocols my dad's company refused to update. Sloppy, negligent, vulnerable, and I knew exactly what to do with it. The day after the event, I took a walk through the Modulus Systems office, passing by my dev team in our downtown workspace. The walls were glass, clean, transparent, just how I like my company. I paused outside the strategy room, looked in at Janet, and knocked. She opened the door. You've got that face again. What face? The face you had when you rewrote our payment architecture in 48 hours just to prove the CTO wrong. I smiled. I've got an idea. I need you and Timo to come in early tomorrow. She tilted her head. This about your dad's company? I didn't answer right away, just nodded slowly. Time to teach them what a backup plan can really do. Here's the part no one in my family knew. While they were busy pretending I was the black sheep, I was building a platform that quietly outpaced half the companies in our region. My software automated logistics and vendor communication for mid-sized manufacturers, the exact kind of service my dad's company had been outsourcing inefficiently for years. We'd pitched them once, back when we were still small. They declined, saying they preferred more established solutions. Translation, I was still the kid with the dusty laptop. But now we were 10 times bigger than the provider they used. Faster, cheaper, safer. And I knew their contract was up for renewal in 3 months. So we moved fast. First, we finalized a deal with their largest competitor. I didn't hide who I was. I sat in that boardroom, looked the new execs in the eye, and said, I know how they operate. I watched it for 20 years. Let me show you how to do it better. They signed in 2 weeks. Next, I reached out to 3 of their satellite vendors, small logistics shops who always complained about delayed payments and clunky portals. I offered our services with 0 onboarding costs. We'd eat the expense for the first 6 months. They said yes immediately. Then came the final piece. We launched an open-source version of our internal dashboard system, completely free. It wasn't as powerful as our main product, but it was good enough to get companies hooked. And we targeted one market specifically, manufacturers in my dad's sector. By the time my father's company realized what was happening, it was already too late. Their logistics provider bailed, picked us instead. Their vendor network thinned out, moved to our dashboard. Their merger partner began questioning the acquisition, citing digital instability. Internally, the company started hemorrhaging confidence. Stocks slumped. Press started to whisper. And then came the audit. One of our partner firms, a mid-sized regulatory consultancy, conducted a digital infrastructure review for every client in their network. It was routine, standard. But someone tipped them off to take a closer look at my father's company's security protocols. They failed. Miserably. Articles started popping up. Headlines like, Legacy Manufacturer Struggles to Modernize Amid Tech Transition. Rising star in automation sector poaches key clients from longtime industry player. They never named me, but anyone paying attention could connect the dots. Natalie did. She showed up at my office one afternoon. I was reviewing quarterly projections with Janet when the front desk pinged me. She's here, the receptionist said. Let her up, I replied. Janet raised an eyebrow. This gonna be dramatic? Probably. When Natalie walked in, she looked different. No glam. No heels. Just jeans and a hoodie. Her makeup was minimal. Her eyes tired. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a moment before speaking. You did this. I didn't deny it. You couldn't just leave it alone, could you? She said, voice shaking. You had to destroy Dad's company. I didn't destroy anything, I said calmly. They did that themselves. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences. She sat down across from me and stared at the floor. He's not sleeping, she said. Mom barely talks. Everyone's scared. I waited. I told them you'd come after us, she whispered. After what I did. I leaned forward slightly. You think this is about what you did to me? The invoice. The lot. She looked up. It's not, I said. This is about years of silence. Years of being ignored. This is about them choosing you, over and over again, and pretending it was normal. Pretending it didn't hurt. I didn't ask them to choose me, she snapped. No, you just enjoyed it. We sat in silence for a long time. Finally, she said, so what now? I shrugged. Now they figure it out. Maybe they adapt. Maybe they collapse. That's not my problem. She stood up to leave, paused at the door, and turned back. You were always smarter than me, she said quietly. I never wanted to be better than you, I replied. I just wanted to be enough. She left without another word. 3 weeks later, the merger fell through. My dad stepped down voluntarily after a shareholder vote of no confidence. They issued a statement thanking him for his visionary leadership and expressing excitement about a new era of innovation. He didn't return my calls. My mom sent me an email with no subject line. It just said, "You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it." I didn't respond, because it wasn't about what I wanted. It was about what I needed. Closure, accountability, balance. But just when I thought it was all behind me, I got a letter in the mail. Another one. This one wasn't from my parents. It was from my aunt, Aunt Marie. She'd always been the only one who really saw me, even as a kid. She never picked sides. Just watched. Waited. Loved quietly. Her letter was short. "Cole, I know this storm has been brewing a long time. And while I can't pretend I understand every piece of it, I want you to know something. You didn't burn anything down. You just stopped holding up a house that was already collapsing. And sometimes, the only way to rebuild is to clear the wreckage. Love always. Marie." I folded the letter and placed it next to the first one, the one from my mom, in the same drawer. Side by side, past and present. That weekend, I took Dylan's advice and drove out to the coast. Sat on the cliffs, let the wind rip through my jacket, and stared at the waves until the sun dipped below the horizon. No noise. No headlines. No Natalie. No pretending. Just me. For the first time, I wasn't the backup plan. I wasn't waiting for them to see me. I had become someone I was proud of. Someone undeniable. And as the last bit of sun disappeared over the edge of the world, I whispered something into the cold air, just for me. I was never too sensitive. I just felt everything they refused to feel. And that was the end of it. My name's Jake. I'm 33 now, but this story takes place just a few months after I turned 30, right around the time everything started slipping out from under me. I just lost my job at a mid-sized marketing firm after a massive round of layoffs. No fault of my own, my numbers were solid, and I had even closed a major client 2 weeks before the axe dropped. But it didn't matter. They were restructuring, and I wasn't essential. I remember packing up my desk in silence, watching the HR rep pretend she was sorry. But the real mess didn't begin there. It started when I made the decision to move back into my dad's house. I didn't have much of a choice. My savings were thin. Rent in the city was laughably high, and job prospects were slow. My girlfriend had just broken up with me, claimed I was emotionally distant, while I was quietly drowning in stress. So that was another door closed. I figured my dad's place would be a temporary solution. Just a couple of months, tops. I'd stay in the basement, apply to jobs, and get back on my feet. That was the plan. I didn't expect it to turn into a slow-burn nightmare. Let me explain the family layout real quick. My dad, Alan, is 62, a retired contractor who somehow still acts like he's the only person in the world who's ever worked a real job. The kind of guy who believes a 101-degree fever means you're just being soft. And then there's my Aunt Karen. Yes, that's actually her name, who lives 2 streets over and pops in uninvited at least 3 times a week. She's never worked a day in her life, spent most of her adult years chasing pyramid schemes, and still thinks she's smarter than everyone else in the room. Together, they form what I can only describe as a smug, self-righteous feedback loop. And I was stupid enough to step into it. At first, it was little things. Comments that felt like paper cuts, small, but they kept adding up. I'd come upstairs to grab coffee in the morning, and Dad would be watching the news. "Still in your pajamas, huh?" he'd say without looking up. Or I'd mention a job interview I had scheduled, and he'd chuckle. "Better not mess this one up." Aunt Karen wasn't much better. She'd show up with grocery bags, act like she was doing everyone a favor, and then say something like, "Jake, you could at least help bring them in. You're not doing anything else." I bit my tongue at first. I figured it was stress talking. Maybe they were just old-fashioned, and I needed to give them some grace. But it kept going. It wasn't just passive digs anymore. It was like they were building a case against me. Every little thing I did was wrong. If I cooked dinner, it was too spicy. If I went for a run, it was, must be nice having so much free time. I couldn't win. And the worst part? They'd gang up on me. They fed off each other's disapproval like it was some kind of family sport. I tried staying out of the way. I kept to the basement, headphones in, resume open, staying productive. But I wasn't just dealing with unemployment. Something was going on with my body, something I couldn't quite explain. It started as tightness in my chest. Just a weird pressure at first, like someone sitting on my ribs. Then shortness of breath, especially when I went up the stairs too quickly. I chalked it up to stress. Maybe I wasn't sleeping enough. Maybe it was anxiety. I didn't want to sound dramatic. But there was one afternoon I'll never forget, because that's when the cracks really started to widen. I had just gotten off the phone with a recruiter who basically ghosted me mid-call. I went upstairs to grab a glass of water, and Karen was already there, sitting at the kitchen table, stirring her tea like a Victorian villain. Dad was fiddling with a wrench at the sink, pretending to fix something that had been broken for years. I reached for a glass, and Karen smirked. "Sleep well?" she asked, her tone as sweet as battery acid. I gave her a polite nod. "Yeah, thanks." "You know," she continued, "when your cousin Brian lost his job, he didn't just sit around moping. He started driving for Uber the next day. Didn't wait for the world to hand him something." Dad chimed in, not missing a beat. "Yep, Brian's a hustler. That kid doesn't make excuses." I wanted to say, Brian also doesn't have a collapsed lung, but I didn't know that yet. All I knew was that I couldn't breathe properly, and I felt like I was living in a fishbowl full of judgment. I smiled weakly and excused myself, pretending I had another interview lined up. As I walked back downstairs, my vision swam for a second. Just a brief flicker of dizziness. It passed quickly, but something told me to pay attention. Of course, telling my dad I didn't feel right was like telling a brick wall I needed emotional support. When I casually mentioned the chest tightness later that night, he snorted and said, "Maybe try doing a few push-ups once in a while. You're 30, not 80. Karen added, "Probably just heartburn from all that spicy food you cook. Try Tums." I nodded and dropped the subject, even though the tightness had moved to a burning sensation. I didn't want to seem weak. Not in that house. That weekend, my younger cousin Lindsay threw a birthday party for her toddler, and Dad insisted I come. Said it would be good for me to get out. Karen offered to drive, which meant I was stuck in the front seat with her commentary all the way there. "So," she said, turning down the radio, "any luck with the job hunt? Or are we still on vacation?" I stared out the window. Sent out a bunch of resumes. "Got an interview next week." "That's what you said last week," she replied, voice laced with amusement. "You know, Jake, not everything's about waiting for the perfect fit. Sometimes you have to take what you can get." I didn't respond. There was no point. The party was fine. Balloons, cupcakes, chaos. But I started feeling winded after helping carry a folding table into the yard. I wasn't doing anything strenuous. Just walking across grass. But I felt like I'd run a marathon. I leaned against a fence, trying to breathe, and my vision blurred again. Karen noticed. "Oh, for goodness sake," she said, rolling her eyes. "Don't be so dramatic. You act like you're dying." That hit me harder than I expected. I looked at her, mouth open, but no words came out. The tightness in my chest flared again, sharper this time. My fingertips tingled. I excused myself quietly and sat in the car until the party ended. No one asked where I went. The following week, things boiled over. It was a Tuesday afternoon. I was upstairs looking for a screwdriver. I'd offered to fix the loose railing on the back steps, hoping it might earn me a scrap of goodwill. I was halfway up the stairs when the dizziness returned full force. My chest clamped down like a vice. I stumbled, catching the wall with one hand. Karen was in the living room. Dad was watching TV. I couldn't speak at first. I was too focused on not collapsing, but they noticed the noise. Dad turned. "Jake, what are you doing?" I tried to respond, but it came out like a gasp. "Oh, come on," Karen said, waving a hand. "He's doing that thing again. Acting like he's got some mysterious illness just because life didn't go his way." I looked at my dad, pleading silently. He frowned, annoyed. "Quit faking it," he snapped. "I'm not in the mood for this today." I was shaking now, legs weak, hands numb. My breath caught in my throat like gravel. Someone muttered, probably Karen, "Here we go again." And then everything blurred. I heard a neighbor shouting. A phone call. Sirens. The front door burst open. The EMT walked in, took one look at me, grabbed my wrist, and shouted, "We need a stretcher, now." And just like that, the entire room, my dad, my aunt, the judgment, the mockery, collapsed into chaos. That was the moment everything changed. When I woke up, everything felt heavy, like I was underwater. The hospital lights above me buzzed faintly, and there was this steady beep echoing from somewhere near my left ear. My chest burned with every breath, and when I tried to move, something tugged at my arm, 4 tubes. For a second, I couldn't remember what had happened. Then it all came back in waves. The stairs, the dizziness, my dad yelling at me to stop faking it, my aunt's voice dripping with disdain. I turned my head slowly, and there they were, sitting side by side in the corner of the room like they were waiting for a dentist appointment, my dad and Aunt Karen. Dad had that same stony expression, he always wore when something inconvenienced him. Karen looked bored, scrolling through her phone. "Oh," she said when she noticed me stirring. "You're awake." Her tone wasn't relief. It was more like she was annoyed I'd interrupted her scrolling. Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "They said you passed out. Dehydration or something." I didn't say anything at first. My throat was dry and my head spun. The nurse came in before I could ask. She smiled, the kind of tired smile that only hospital staff can pull off. "You're lucky, Mr. Miller," she said gently. "Your oxygen levels dropped pretty low. If the EMTs hadn't arrived when they did, it could have been serious. Your lung collapsed, likely due to a spontaneous pneumothorax." I blinked, trying to process that. "Collapsed?" I croaked. She nodded. "Yes. It's rare, but it happens, especially with certain genetic predispositions or stress factors. You'll need to take it easy for a while." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw my aunt raise an eyebrow. "So it wasn't stress?" The nurse gave her a look that could have cut glass. "It was a physical medical emergency. Not something he imagined, ma'am." I wish I could say my dad looked remorseful. Shocked, maybe. But all I saw was discomfort, the kind you get when you're caught doing something embarrassing in public. "Well," he said after the nurse left, "good thing you're all right. Maybe now you'll finally get some rest and stop overworking yourself." Overworking myself? I wanted to laugh, but it hurt too much. For the next 2 days, I stayed in that hospital room. Alone mostly. My dad and Karen stopped by once more, dropped off some takeout, and left after 10 minutes because the parking meter was running. My cousin Brian came by, though. He looked genuinely concerned, which, honestly, threw me off. We'd never been that close, but he'd heard through the family grapevine that I'd been hospitalized. "Man," he said quietly, sitting by the bed. "They didn't tell me it was this bad." I shrugged weakly. "They probably think I'm being dramatic." Brian frowned. "That's messed up. I mean, you literally couldn't breathe." "Yeah." I smiled faintly. Guess that wasn't convincing enough. When I was finally discharged, the nurse gave me a long list of instructions: rest, follow-up scans, avoid stress, and no heavy lifting. I promised I would. But when I got back home, the air felt heavier than the hospital oxygen mask. Dad was in the living room watching sports. Karen was there too, as usual, eating chips like she owned the place. "Well, look who's back," she said, her voice chirpy but laced with sarcasm. "Our miracle patient." I ignored her and went straight to the basement. I thought maybe they'd treat me differently now. Maybe the near-death thing would shake some empathy loose. But within a week, everything went back to normal, or worse. Every morning, Dad would find some way to jab at me. "You know, sitting around isn't going to make you better." Or, "Real men bounce back faster than this." Karen doubled down. "You're milking it, Jake. Everyone gets tired sometimes. You can't use that as an excuse forever." One night, after dinner, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. I hadn't meant to eavesdrop. I was on my way up to grab some water, but their voices carried through the vent. "Karen, he's taking advantage of you, Alan. I mean, he's 30. 30. You think it's normal for him to just sit in your house all day?" "Dad, I don't know what else to do with him. He says he's applying for jobs." "Karen, yeah, and I say I'm a millionaire. Doesn't make it true." "Dad, he's been through a lot." "Karen, please. So have we all. The world doesn't owe him sympathy." Something inside me twisted. I wanted to barge in, but what was the point? They'd just call me sensitive again. Instead, I went back downstairs, sat on the edge of my bed, and just stared at the wall for a while. I was tired, not just physically, but emotionally hollow. The real breaking point came 2 weeks later. It was a Friday evening. I'd been working remotely with a small freelance client, just enough to cover groceries and phone bills. I felt good about it. For the first time in months, I had something resembling momentum. That night, I was supposed to have a follow-up appointment with my doctor. Dad had agreed to drive me since I still wasn't supposed to overexert myself. But when I came upstairs, dressed and ready, he wasn't there. Neither was the car. I called him. No answer. Then I texted, "Hey, are you still driving me? Appointment's at 6. No response. At 6:15, Karen texted me from her phone instead. "Alan's helping me with something important. Reschedule your appointment." I stared at the screen. My chest tightened again, though this time it wasn't from my lungs. I called the clinic to explain and managed to push the appointment to the following week, but the embarrassment hit harder than I expected. I was 30 years old, stranded like a teenager, because my dad decided my aunt's something important was a priority. When they finally came home around 8, I was waiting in the kitchen. What was so important? I asked, trying to sound calm. Karen waved her hand. Relax. We were dealing with a situation. My neighbor's fence fell, and Alan knows his way around tools. Didn't want to bother you since you're still recovering. The way she said recovering made it sound like a punchline. Dad didn't even meet my eyes. You could have called an Uber. With what money? I shot back. You know I'm just starting freelance work again. He shrugged. Then you should have planned better. Something inside me snapped right there. All I do is plan. I said, louder than I intended. I've been trying to rebuild everything, and you treat me like I'm some lazy kid. I almost died, Dad. That wasn't fake. That wasn't some overreaction. And the minute I'm out of the hospital, you both start mocking me again like nothing happened. Karen stood up, crossing her arms. Don't raise your voice at your father. You're living under his roof. Show some respect. I turned to her, shaking. Respect goes both ways. Her smirk didn't fade. Oh, you poor thing. You think you've had it so hard? Try raising a family on one income during the recession. Try being responsible. I laughed bitterly. You've never worked a day in your life, Karen. That shut her up for a moment. Dad slammed his palm against the table. Enough. You don't talk to her that way. She's family. So am I said quietly. But you don't treat me like it. He glared at me, jaw tightening. Maybe when you start acting like a man, I will. I walked out. Not just out of the kitchen, out of the house. I didn't even grab a jacket. I walked around the neighborhood until my lungs protested again. I ended up sitting on a park bench, shaking from both anger and cold. That night, when I came back, they had locked the front door. My own dad had locked me out. I stood there, knocking softly at first, then harder. I could see the light still on in the living room. I knew they heard me. Finally, after 5 minutes, the door creaked open. Dad stood there, ice cold. Don't wake the neighbors, he muttered. You can come in, but don't pull that attitude again. I didn't say anything. I just went downstairs and shut the door behind me. Over the next few days, things got quieter, unnaturally so. Karen stopped showing up for a bit, which should have been a relief, but it only made me more uneasy. Dad barely spoke to me, except for clipped sentences about bills or chores. The tension was thick enough to choke on. Then, one morning, I woke up to find the basement door open, and my belongings half-packed into boxes. At first, I thought maybe Dad was reorganizing something. But then I saw the note taped to the wall, written in his handwriting. Jake, Karen's friend has a place you can rent. You'll need to be out by Friday. I think it's time you learn to stand on your own 2 feet. I stood there, holding the note, my chest burning again, not from a medical condition this time, but from betrayal. I went upstairs, note in hand. Karen was already there, sipping coffee like she owned the house. Dad was silent, sitting beside her. What is this? I asked. She answered for him. Alan and I talked. You've been here for months, and it's not healthy. You're too comfortable. You need a push. I stared at her. A push? You think this is helping? She smiled faintly. Sometimes tough love is the best kind. Dad wouldn't look at me. I realized then that this wasn't just about money or space. It was about control. About pride. My illness, my effort, my pain, none of it mattered. They just couldn't stand seeing me vulnerable. That Friday, I packed my things quietly. Karen hovered nearby, supervising. She even commented on what I chose to take. You don't need that old laptop, do you? It's practically junk. When I got to my car, she said, you'll thank us one day. I didn't respond. But in my head, something hardened. Because I knew, deep down, they'd just handed me the motivation I'd been missing. And one day, they'd regret it. Badly. When I drove away from my dad's house with the last of my things stuffed into the back seat of my aging Civic, I didn't feel angry. Not at first. I felt empty, numb, like someone had just erased the last page of my story and left me staring at a blank one. It was raining, of course, the kind of slow drizzle that creeps into your shoes and your bones. I pulled over 2 blocks away and just sat there for a while, forehead against the steering wheel, listening to the soft rhythm of water tapping on the roof. My whole life, I had this quiet belief that if I did the right thing, worked hard, treated people decently, didn't make a fuss, life would meet me halfway. But apparently, it doesn't work like that. Karen's friend, the one who supposedly had a place for me, turned out to be a woman who rented out a decaying attic room above her garage. No insulation, shared bathroom, and she charged more than my freelance income could cover. I thanked her politely and left. For 3 days, I lived in my car, parked behind a 24-hour diner where I could sneak in and buy a coffee every few hours to avoid looking suspicious. I told myself it was temporary, just a weird blip in the timeline. But then the freelance client I'd been working with suddenly stopped responding. I emailed. I followed up. Nothing. The invoice I'd sent remained unpaid, and I didn't have the energy to chase them down. My chest ached constantly, but I pushed through it, telling myself it was just healing pain. Rock bottom wasn't loud. It wasn't some dramatic breakdown or a big fight. It was sitting in that car at 2 a.m., phone battery dying, hungry, sweaty, and too ashamed to call anyone. I had friends, not many, but good ones, and I knew at least 2 of them would have helped if I'd asked. But I couldn't. Something about that kind of vulnerability felt too raw, like I'd be confirming everything Karen had ever said about me. So I made a plan. I found a battered co-working cafe on the edge of town that offered unlimited coffee, power outlets, and, most importantly, a bathroom. I used it as my base of operations during the day. I applied for jobs, updated my portfolio, reached out to old clients, even posted on a couple of freelancing boards asking for leads. At night, I'd rotate where I parked to avoid suspicion. A grocery store lot, a church parking lot, a park near the lake. The funny thing is, that period, as humiliating and bleak as it was, stripped away all the noise. I had nothing left to distract me. No fake politeness. No smug relatives offering tough love. Just me and the silence. And for the first time in months, I started hearing myself again. One morning, I checked my inbox and found a message from a small tech startup based in Portland. They'd seen my portfolio on a design forum I barely remembered posting to. The founder, a guy named Evan, said he liked my work and needed someone to redesign their branding for an upcoming launch. It wasn't huge money, but it was something. More than something, it was validation. We hopped on a Zoom call that afternoon. I wore the one clean button-down I had and took the call in the cafe's back corner, praying the Wi-Fi would hold. Evan was chill, mid-30s, smart, humble, and he didn't care that I didn't have a fancy agency name behind me. He wanted results. I promised him results. For 2 weeks, I poured everything I had into that project. Slept in the car. Ate granola bars. But I designed like my life depended on it, because it did. I delivered early, added a few extras, and Evan was blown away. "You ever think about working full-time remote?" he asked. I blinked. "Are you offering?" "Let's talk," he said. By the end of that month, I had a contract. A real one. With benefits. A starting salary that nearly matched what I'd made at the marketing firm. And the best part? I could work from anywhere. The first thing I did was find a studio apartment. Tiny, yes, but clean, with its own bathroom and a window that let in real light. I signed a short-term lease and moved in with a single duffel bag and a sense of cautious hope. The second thing I did was go to a doctor. A proper follow-up. Got scans, tests, everything. Turns out the lung was healing okay, but the stress had caused lingering inflammation. I was given medication and told to take it easy. I actually listened this time. Over the next few months, I rebuilt myself piece by piece. I started exercising again, light stuff at first. Walks, yoga from YouTube videos. I started reading, not job listings, but books I actually liked. I reconnected with my college friend Jonah, who invited me over for game nights. I even adopted a cat from the shelter, scrappy little thing with a torn ear and a mean stare that softened over time. I named her Olive. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And here's the thing no one tells you. Once you stop trying to prove your worth to people who never saw it in the first place, life gets quieter, clearer. But then, 6 months in, I got a text. From Karen. "Karen, hi Jake. Hope you're doing well. Quick question. Do you still have your dad's old tax forms? He's being audited and needs help organizing things." I stared at the screen for a long time. Not because I was surprised, I wasn't, but because it was so brazen, so completely lacking in context or apology. "No, how have you been?" "No, we're sorry for how we treated you. Just a request." I didn't respond. The next day, my dad called. I let it go to voicemail. "Jake, I know things got tense, but we need to talk. Karen says you might have some of my paperwork. Call me back." Still, no apology. I sat in my new living room, cat curled up on my lap, and realized something important. They hadn't changed. They'd just run into a problem I could help with. And for the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated. I wasn't the struggling son in their basement anymore. I was someone who'd crawled through mud and made it out clean. And they hadn't even noticed. But they would. Oh, they absolutely would. Because that quiet strength I'd built wasn't just for me. It was the fuel for something bigger. Something calculated. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to fight. I was going to show them exactly what happens when you write someone off too soon. And the next phase? That's where things started to get interesting. I didn't reply to my dad's voicemail. Not the next day, or the one after. I knew he expected me to cave. To be the good son, again, quiet, compliant, helpful even when hurt. That's how it always worked before. But this time, I didn't feel guilt. I felt clarity. They didn't want me back in their lives unless I was convenient, useful. And that meant one thing. I had leverage. The silence stretched for a week. Then two. I kept working. The startup gig was going great. Evan, the founder, was thrilled with my designs and even let me take point on a few new product features. I was learning fast, gaining confidence, and most importantly, I was saving money. More money than I ever had before. One afternoon in early spring, Evan messaged me on Slack. Evan, random question. You ever think about investing in something bigger? Like starting your own agency or studio? At first, I laughed it off. Me? Run a studio? But Evan wasn't joking. I've worked with enough agencies to know when someone has that spark, he said on our next call. You've got it. You care more than most of them. And you know what people like your dad never get? Caring is a superpower. That word, dad, made something tighten in my chest. I hadn't told Evan anything, but somehow he still managed to strike the exact nerve. That night, I stayed up late sketching on my whiteboard. Not designs, plans, connections, names, a web of ideas and intentions, all pointing toward one thing, revenge. Not the petty kind. Not fire and drama and screaming matches. I didn't want to burn bridges. I wanted to build something so high they'd choke on the view from the bottom. So I started with information. My dad's voicemail had mentioned taxes. That gave me a thread. I logged into the shared family Google Drive that I hadn't touched in years. He never changed the password. Classic. Inside the finances folder were old scanned tax documents, PDFs of receipts, and one spreadsheet ominously titled Rental Income 2013 to 2021. Rental income? I opened it and felt my stomach drop. Rows and rows of numbers. Addresses. Payment logs. Tenant names. All tied to properties I had never known my dad owned. I'd thought he just lived in our old house and lived off his retirement. Turns out, he was sitting on a small empire of rental properties, 7, to be exact, and raking in money for almost a decade. That explained the paid-off truck. The sudden, helping Karen with projects excuse. The extra spending. And the worst part? I saw my name on one of the tenant logs. From 2 years ago. $600 per month. I hadn't paid rent. I hadn't been charged rent. But there it was, my name, listed as a temporary occupant, with rent logged for each month I lived there after the layoff. He'd been reporting fake rental income under my name, probably to pad his losses elsewhere or hide money from taxes. That was it. The moment my forgiveness died. This wasn't just about disrespect. This was fraud. And he'd done it with my name. I spent the next few weeks collecting evidence. Quietly, methodically, I downloaded everything, cross-referenced it with property records, tracked the addresses, the tenants, the paper trail. I found one building still under his name, but listed under a shell company. And guess who was registered as the silent partner, without even knowing it? Me. He'd used my name for that too. At first, I thought about going to the IRS, reporting everything, burning it all to the ground. But I held back, not out of mercy, out of patience. Because the thing about revenge is, timing is everything. And mine was coming. In the meantime, I needed allies. So I reached out to the one person in the family who'd always treated me like a human being, my cousin Brian. We hadn't talked much since the hospital visit, but I sent him a text asking if he wanted to grab a drink. He replied within 5 minutes. We met at a dive bar just off the highway, quiet, low lighting, neutral territory. Brian walked in wearing his usual jeans and hoodie, offered a half smile, and said, "You look good, man. Better than before." I nodded. "Yeah, I feel better. A lot better." He took a sip of his beer and leaned forward. "So this about your dad?" I smiled. "Partly, but it's about a lot more than that." I told him everything. Not just about the collapse and the hospital and the way I'd been pushed out, but about the documents I found. The shell companies. The fake rental logs. The silent partner trick. Brian's jaw tightened. He used your name? Multiple times, I said. And he's not even being careful about it. He shook his head slowly. That's not just shady. That's illegal. I know. And Karen? She knows. I laughed. Please. She probably told him to do it. Brian took a long sip and set his glass down. So what do you want to do? I met his eyes. I want them to see what happens when you gamble on the wrong person. I want them to regret ever using me. He didn't hesitate. I'm in. Turns out, Brian had his own history with Karen. Years ago, she'd borrowed a few grand from him to pay for her daughter's tuition, money that mysteriously disappeared the same month her kitchen got remodeled. He'd never seen a cent back. We formed a plan. Step 1 was securing a paper trail. With Brian's help, I reached out to a friend of his who worked in real estate, someone who could verify ownership records and provide clean, notarized copies of the title transfers. We confirmed everything: the properties, the shell company, the tax filings. All tied to Dad. All with my name somewhere it shouldn't be. Step 2 was getting ahead of the narrative. I didn't want to just expose him. I wanted to own the story. So I created a website. Clean, professional, anonymous. On the surface, it was a design portfolio, but hidden within it was a locked page labeled Inheritance. That page held the files, the receipts, the scanned documents, screenshots, everything. It was password protected, but it existed, and I had the power to send it to anyone I chose. Step 3 was leverage. One of the properties on that spreadsheet, a duplex in a nearby neighborhood, had a tenant listed as vacant for nearly a year. But property tax records showed a steady line of utility payments. Someone was living there, possibly under the table. I drove by one afternoon and saw a car in the driveway, a beat-up sedan with expired tags. I knocked on the door. A young woman answered, holding a baby. She was nervous at first until I explained who I was and what I'd found. He's been charging you rent off the books? I asked gently. She nodded, clutching the baby closer. Said it was a handshake agreement. Cheaper this way. Has he ever given you a lease? No. I tried to get one once, and he said not to worry about it, that he'd handle the paperwork. I handed her a card with the website URL and password. I think you should take a look at this. And if anyone threatens you, call me first. She stared at the card, then at me. Why are you helping? I smiled. Let's just say I'm tired of him getting away with everything. As the weeks passed, I gathered more. Little details. Patterns. I even found an old voicemail Karen had left me last year, where she admitted to managing things behind the scenes for my dad's property accounts. It wasn't explicit, but it was enough to suggest complicity. Then, like fate was smiling at me, I got an invitation. A wedding. Karen's daughter, Lindsay, was getting married in June. They were throwing a big party, open invite for all the family, at a vineyard they couldn't possibly afford without Dad's help. And that's when I knew. The opportunity had finally arrived. One night, I opened the wedding website. Karen had included a family photo tribute section, old pictures of Lindsay, grandparents, cousins. There, buried in the back, was a photo from my childhood, me and Lindsay and Karen and Dad at a lake. My name was miscaptioned as Brian. I stared at it for a long time. Then I smiled, because I'd be attending that wedding. With a gift. Not a toaster. Not a check. But something they'd never forget. The morning of the wedding, I woke up earlier than usual. The air was cool, the kind that feels crisp enough to cut through any leftover doubt. Olive, my cat, was asleep at the foot of the bed, purring softly, completely unaware that today wasn't just another Saturday. Today was the day I stopped being the family scapegoat. The vineyard was about an hour's drive from my apartment. As I pulled up, I could already see Karen's fingerprints all over it. Every detail screamed performative luxury. White roses, gold-trimmed tablecloths, string lights that looked like they belonged in a home decor catalog. She'd turned the whole thing into a stage, and for once, I didn't mind. I had every intention of stealing the show. I wasn't invited, technically, but Karen's family had always been the kind that cared more about appearances than boundaries. A late RSVP under guest of Brian Miller had slipped right through the cracks. And Brian, bless him, had texted me earlier that morning. Brian, you sure about this? Me, more than ever. Brian, then I'll be near the bar. If things go sideways, I'll distract them. We'd planned every detail down to the minute. My revenge wasn't going to be loud. No shouting match, no overturned tables. Just quiet truth, spoken in the right room, at the perfect moment. The ceremony went by in a blur of forced smiles and champagne toasts. Karen was in her element, parading from table to table, telling anyone who would listen how proud she was of her daughter and how family is everything. Every word made my skin crawl. My dad stood beside her in a sleek suit, trying to look noble. He saw me once from across the courtyard, blinked in surprise, and then quickly looked away. When dinner ended and the speeches began, I made my move. While Karen was basking in attention near the microphone, I slipped away toward the event coordinator's booth, a little tent behind the main hall with a soundboard and a laptop connected to the projector system. Earlier that week, Brian and I had paid a quiet visit to the venue. He'd told the coordinator we were part of the video team and needed to test some visuals. We'd uploaded a short, 2-minute slideshow labeled Family Tribute, Backup. Except it wasn't a tribute. I stood behind the booth, waited for the cue, Karen's toast, and gave the coordinator a small nod. He clicked play, thinking he was starting the tribute reel she'd asked for. The lights dimmed. The guests turned toward the big screen. The first image that appeared was innocent enough, an old photo of Karen holding baby Lindsay. Then one of Dad, hammer in hand, building something in the yard. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Then came the next slide. A spreadsheet. Rows of numbers. Property addresses. The title, Rental Income, 2013 to 2021. At first, people thought it was some kind of joke. Then another slide, a tax document with Dad's name, and under co-owner/dependent, Jake Miller. Murmurs started spreading. Confused faces. Then the next slide showed an image of a bank transaction labeled Cash Deposit, Shell Holdings LLC. The final one? A scanned screenshot of the Shell company registration form, listing both Alan Miller and Jake Miller as partners. My name. My father's fraud. Publicly displayed under a glowing chandelier. Karen froze mid-sentence. Her smile dropped so fast it was almost comical. Dad's face drained of color. And then, silence. The kind that swallows an entire room. Karen stormed toward the booth, heels clicking like gunfire. "Turn that off," she hissed. "Turn it off right now." But before she could reach me, Brian intercepted her, stepping neatly into her path. "You might want to let it play," he said calmly. "There's more." The slideshow ended, replaced by a simple black screen with white text. Some inherit money. Others inherit debt. I inherited lies. Then, fade out. The lights came back up. The crowd was stunned. Lindsay, the bride, looked mortified. Her fiancé's family whispered behind folded hands. One of the groomsmen muttered, "What the hell was that?" Dad was the first to move. He pushed through the tables toward me, face flushed, jaw tight. "What did you do?" he barked, voice low but venomous. I met his stare evenly. Told the truth. "You think you can humiliate me like this?" I tilted my head. "I didn't humiliate you, Dad. You did that yourself when you used my name for your dirty business." Karen joined in, pointing a trembling finger at me. "You've ruined everything. Do you have any idea what this day meant for our family?" I let out a dry laugh. "Yeah, I do. It was about appearances, right? About pretending to be perfect. Well, congratulations. Now everyone gets to see the real picture." Security moved in after that, but not before I delivered the final blow. I handed Dad an envelope I'd been carrying since morning. "By the way," I said quietly, "you'll want to open that before the IRS does." He snatched it from me, ripped it open, and froze. Inside was a printed letter from an attorney. Not mine, technically, Brian's friend who specialized in real estate law, outlining the upcoming audit request that had already been filed anonymously, along with a neat list of properties, transactions, and discrepancies. His hand shook as he read. Karen's face went pale as she peeked over his shoulder. I leaned in just close enough for only them to hear. "You shouldn't have faked my name. You shouldn't have locked me out. And you really shouldn't have assumed I'd stay weak forever." Then I walked out. The aftermath unfolded faster than I expected. Within a week, my father's properties were under review. Tenants were interviewed. The vacant duplex occupant, the young mother I'd spoken to, came forward with proof of cash payments. Investigators uncovered thousands in undeclared income. And when they realized my name had been attached to several filings without consent, the case escalated. I didn't need to press charges. The system did it for me. Karen tried to spin it, of course. She told everyone I'd gone rogue, that I'd hacked into family documents. But that story fell apart when emails surfaced, the one she'd sent my dad discussing creative bookkeeping. By the end of the summer, my father's accounts were frozen pending investigation. He sold his truck to cover initial legal fees. The man who once mocked me for being too soft now had to borrow money from the same relatives who used to praise him. Karen disappeared from social media entirely. Lindsay's marriage barely lasted 3 months. Her husband's family wanted nothing to do with the scandal. And me? I moved forward. Evan, my boss, offered me a promotion. "You've got grit," he said during our next call. "Most people would have folded. You built yourself back from nothing." I didn't tell him the whole story. Some parts are better left unspoken, but I thanked him. I also expanded my freelancing portfolio, quietly turning it into a small design collective. Within a year, I had 3 people working under me. Brian even joined as a consultant. We called it Second Wind Studio. A fitting name, I think. I didn't hear from my dad for almost a year. Then one night, out of nowhere, I got an email. The subject line, "I'm sorry." It was short, barely a paragraph. He said he'd lost most of his savings, that he was trying to rebuild. He said he missed me, that maybe one day we could talk. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I closed the laptop. Because I realized something. Forgiveness isn't the same as forgetting. And closure doesn't always require conversation. The next morning, I went for a walk by the lake, the same one from that old family photo. The air was calm, and for once, so was I. The past had burned itself out. All that remained was quiet peace. As I watched the sun rise over the water, I thought about everything I'd lost, everything I'd rebuilt, and everyone who'd tried to break me. Then I smiled. Because in the end, the sweetest revenge wasn't the downfall I caused. It was the life I built after. And I never looked back again. My name's Oliver, I'm 29, and for as long as I can remember, my family has had a knack for making me feel like the smallest person in the room. It wasn't always loud, obvious insults, though there were plenty of those. Sometimes it was the way my parents would look past me when I spoke, or how they'd nod politely when I shared something I was proud of, only to immediately pivot the conversation to my older brother, Ryan, and his latest big accomplishment. To them, Ryan was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. Me? I was the dreamer who couldn't settle down, the one who never understood the value of hard work. Ironic, considering I've been financially independent since I was 19. For years, I bit my tongue. I thought if I just stayed patient, if I proved myself through actions instead of arguments, eventually they'd see me differently. But no matter what I did, my successes didn't seem to register. They knew I lived in New York, but in their minds, New York meant some dingy little apartment and a job that barely paid the bills. I never corrected them. I let them believe what they wanted, partly because I didn't feel the need to impress them, and partly because, well, I knew they wouldn't believe me anyway. The breaking point came on a rainy Tuesday evening. I had driven back to my hometown for the first time in months, hoping to spend a few days with my parents before heading to a conference. I had barely stepped inside before my dad's voice cut through the living room like a whip. "You're late." Again. I was about to explain that traffic had been brutal, but he waved his hand dismissively. Typical. No respect for anyone's time. Dinner that night was uncomfortable from the start. Ryan had big news. He'd just been promoted, and the entire conversation revolved around how driven and responsible he was. I smiled and congratulated him, but I could feel the subtle jabs my parents kept slipping in my direction. "Maybe you could learn a thing or two from your brother," my mom said at one point, sipping her wine. Dad chimed in. "Yeah, maybe you'd have a real career by now instead of whatever it is you do." It was the whatever it is you do that got me. I've built a thriving business from scratch, one that affords me a lifestyle I never even dreamed of growing up. But to them, because I wasn't chained to a desk in a corporate office or wearing a suit every day, it didn't count. By the time dessert came around, the air in the room was thick with tension. Ryan had just made a joke about me, probably crashing on friends' couches, when Dad set down his fork, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "Oliver, you're 29 years old. It's embarrassing. You have no stability, no respect for us, and frankly, no future if you keep living like this." My mom didn't say anything, but she didn't defend me either. She just stared at her plate. Then Dad leaned back in his chair and delivered the line that burned itself into my memory. "Get your things and go sleep in your car. You're not staying here." For a moment, I thought he was joking, but when I glanced at Ryan, he wasn't laughing. He was smirking, like he'd just won something. My chest tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. "All right," I said quietly. No shouting, no arguing. I stood, walked to the guest room, and gathered the small bag I'd brought. As I stepped outside, the rain was still coming down, soaking through my jacket in seconds. I sat in my car for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. Part of me wanted to drive off and never look back. Another part of me, the part that had spent years swallowing my pride in this house, wanted them to know exactly who they were talking to. But not yet. This wasn't the moment. So I turned the ignition, pulled away from the curb, and headed back to the airport without saying goodbye. They thought I'd be curled up in the back seat of my car that night. In reality, I was flying back to Manhattan, back to my penthouse overlooking Central Park, the one they had no idea I owned. I didn't hear from them for 3 weeks. Then, one morning, there was a knock at my door. And when I opened it, my parents were standing there. In New York, looking desperate. And that's when things started to get interesting. I stood there for a second, my hand still on the door handle, trying to process what I was looking at. My parents, the same people who'd told me to go sleep in my car, now on my doorstep in the middle of New York City. My dad's tie was loose, his usual air of authority looking a little frayed around the edges. Mom clutched her handbag like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. Neither of them said anything right away. Finally, my mom stepped forward, her voice soft, but with that practiced tone she used whenever she was about to ask for something. "Oliver, we need to talk." The last time I heard that phrase from her, it was about how I needed to start taking life more seriously, because Ryan had just bought his first condo, and I was still wandering. I stepped aside slowly, letting them in, but I didn't miss the way my dad's eyes darted around the entryway, scanning the polished marble floors, the artwork on the walls, the floor-to-ceiling windows framing the skyline. He tried to mask it, but I saw that flicker of surprise before his expression hardened again. "Nice place," he said, almost begrudgingly, like the words tasted bitter. They sat down on my couch, but the energy was all wrong. This wasn't a friendly visit, and it wasn't an apology. It was something else, something heavier. I stayed standing, leaning against the armchair, waiting for them to start. Mom took a deep breath. "We've run into a little situation," she began, her eyes darting to Dad. Dad jumped in, his tone sharper, more defensive. "Your brother's business hit a rough patch. The investors pulled out. He's in a bind. We all are." He said, "We," like it was some collective crisis we were all naturally responsible for, as if the years of them keeping me at arm's length didn't matter now. I didn't say anything yet, just let them keep talking. "It's temporary," Mom rushed to add. "We just need a little help to get through this. Ryan's worked so hard, Oliver. You know he's always been there for you." She stopped mid-sentence, realizing that wasn't exactly true. I almost laughed at that. Ryan had spent our whole lives undermining me, taking credit for things I'd done, whispering to our parents that I lacked discipline. The golden child image was one he had polished to perfection with their full support. Dad must have sensed my hesitation because his tone shifted to that commanding voice I'd heard my entire childhood. "This isn't the time to be petty. Family comes first. Ryan's future is at stake, and as his brother, you have a responsibility to step up." That word, responsibility, hit me like a brick. They had never once framed their treatment of me as their responsibility. But now, suddenly, I owed them. I sat down across from them, feeling the weight of years of one-sided loyalty pressing down on me. "And what exactly are you asking for?" I said, keeping my tone even. They exchanged a glance, and then Mom said it. "We need a loan. Just enough to cover expenses until Ryan gets back on his feet. We were thinking maybe 50,000. I almost choked. 50,000, like it was pocket change I could just hand over without a second thought. And the way she said, "we," told me everything. This wasn't about them. This was about saving Ryan. Again. But then Dad added something that made my jaw clench. "You owe us that much after everything we've done for you." I sat back, studying them. I thought of every birthday they'd forgotten, every time they'd canceled plans with me because Ryan needed them, every moment I'd been made to feel like a guest in my own family. And now, here they were, expecting me to swoop in and save the day for the very person who'd made my life miserable. And that's when I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about control. They weren't here to ask. They were here to remind me that, in their eyes, I'd never really outgrown the role they'd assigned me. But what they didn't know was how much I'd outgrown it. I leaned forward, ready to ask a question that would change the direction of this conversation entirely. And just as I opened my mouth, Dad's phone buzzed on the coffee table before I could get the words out. He glanced at the screen, his face tightening. For a split second, he hesitated, and then he picked it up, stepping toward the window with his back to me. I wasn't trying to listen, but his voice carried in the quiet room. Yeah, we're here now. Don't worry, he won't say no. He owes us. He paused, then chuckled. Besides, once we get it, he won't see a dime of it back. I'll make sure of that. My stomach dropped. I looked at Mom, expecting her to at least look uncomfortable, but she wouldn't meet my eyes. She just sat there, smoothing her skirt, pretending she didn't hear. And that was almost worse, because it meant she was in on it too. Dad ended the call and turned back around like nothing had happened. So, Oliver, he said, settling back on the couch. We were thinking we could move quickly on this. No point in dragging it out. Something in me shifted in that moment. This wasn't just about saving Ryan's business or helping them out of some crisis. They'd planned this. They'd come here with the full intention of taking what they could from me and never giving it back. I wanted to call him out right then and there, but before I could speak, my mom leaned forward, her voice low and syrupy. You know, we've always been there for you. Even when you made choices we didn't agree with. We stood by you. Now it's your turn. I couldn't help it. I laughed. A short, bitter laugh that made her flinch. You stood by me? You threw me out in the rain 3 weeks ago and told me to sleep in my car. She froze, but Dad waved it off like I was exaggerating. You were being dramatic. We just needed to push you to do better. That was when Ryan's name flashed on Dad's phone again, and without thinking, Dad answered on speaker this time. Ryan's voice came through loud and clear. So, did he agree? We need to lock in that payment before the bank closes. Make sure you don't let him think it's optional. He's too soft for his own good. I felt my hands tighten into fists. My own brother, the one they'd been asking me to help, sitting comfortably somewhere, assuming I'd just roll over like I always had. Dad glanced at me, realizing too late what had just happened. His mouth opened, maybe to explain, but there was nothing he could say that would make this feel like anything but what it was, a setup. A complete betrayal. It hit me all at once. They didn't come here because they saw me differently now, or because they wanted to mend our relationship. They came because, to them, I was nothing more than a means to an end. I sat back, forcing my voice to stay calm even though my heart was pounding. You know, I said slowly, it's funny. You've spent years making sure I knew I wasn't part of this family's inner circle. But now that you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the one you trust to fix it. Neither of them said a word. And in that silence, I made a decision, one they wouldn't see coming. But before I could lay the first brick of the plan forming in my mind, Dad tried one last move. Oliver, you're not going to make us regret coming to you, are you? I smiled faintly, already knowing the answer to that. And that's when I decided exactly how I was going to handle them. I didn't kick them out right then. As much as every nerve in my body was screaming to end the conversation, slam the door, and let them figure out their mess alone, I stayed calm. Too calm. It was the kind of quiet that made my dad shift uncomfortably and my mom keep glancing at me like she was trying to read my mind. I told them I needed time to think. Dad tried to press me. It's a time-sensitive matter, Oliver, but I just repeated the same sentence, steady and deliberate. I need time to think. They left after about 15 minutes, and as soon as the door clicked shut, I sank onto the couch and just sat there. For the first time in a long while, the walls of my penthouse felt cold. Not because I was lonely. I liked living alone, but because I realized how little these people actually cared for me. It wasn't a new thought, but hearing my dad's voice, hearing Ryan's smug tone on the phone, hearing my mom defend it in her silence, it carved the truth into stone. For the next few days, I couldn't focus on anything. I'd stare at my laptop and the numbers from my business accounts, the same accounts that proved just how far I'd come, and feel no satisfaction. Because what was the point of building a life you were proud of when your own family would twist it into a weakness to exploit? And then, as if to rub salt into the wound, the messages started. First it was my mom, sending long guilt-laced texts about family unity and how this is what your father would do for you, a laughable claim. Then it was Ryan, who didn't even bother to hide his arrogance. You've done well for yourself, Oliver. Now it's time to give back. Like I was some kind of trust fund kid living off their generosity. Every message was a reminder of just how low they thought of me, until they needed something. And the worst part? For a brief moment, I almost considered caving. Not because I wanted to help Ryan, but because part of me still, after everything, wanted my parents to see me as worthy. That thought was my lowest point. Sitting in my home office at 2 a.m., staring out at the lights of the city, I felt like I was right back in my childhood bedroom, waiting for a nod of approval that never came. But the longer I sat there, the more a different kind of clarity began to take shape. I thought about every slight, every joke at my expense, every time they made me feel like my achievements were meaningless. And then I thought about how confident they had been when they showed up at my door, confident that I would fold without question. By the time the sun started coming up, I wasn't feeling small anymore. I was feeling patient. Patient in a way they would never recognize until it was too late. I decided I wouldn't cut them off completely, not yet. That's what they'd expect me to do. Instead, I'd keep the conversation going, make them think I was leaning toward helping. Let them get comfortable. Let them think the hook was set. Because if I was going to walk away from this, I wasn't going to just walk. I was going to make sure they understood exactly why the door was closing. And when it closed, it would be for good. I picked up my phone and drafted a simple reply to my mom's latest message. I've been thinking. Let's talk again soon. And with that, the first quiet step of the plan was set in motion. The days that followed were oddly energizing. It was like a switch had flipped in my head. The same family that had always managed to keep me off balance no longer had the same power over me. Every interaction was now part of a chess game I was determined to win. While they were busy believing I was thinking it over, I was throwing myself into my business harder than ever. My company had been doing well for years, but now I started pushing into new markets, finalizing partnerships I'd been hesitating on, and greenlighting expansion plans that had been sitting on my desk for months. Deals that once felt like long shots began falling into place. Clients referred more clients. My network grew wider, my influence stronger. And with every success, I started feeling something I hadn't felt in years: complete control. Not just over my career, but over my narrative. I no longer needed their validation. I no longer even wanted it. My daily routine shifted. Mornings were spent in strategy meetings overlooking the city, afternoons were dedicated to site visits and signing contracts, and evenings were filled with industry events where I was no longer the quiet observer in the corner. I was the one people sought out. The contrast to how my parents saw me couldn't have been sharper. Every so often, I'd get another message from them or from Ryan. The tone always wavered between entitled and desperate. Have you made your decision yet? It's getting urgent, Oliver. If you care about this family, you'll do the right thing. I'd reply just enough to keep them hopeful, short, polite, non-committal. Meanwhile, my financial position skyrocketed. A deal I closed in late spring meant an influx of capital that not only secured the company for years, but gave me personal leverage I'd never imagined having. I invested in property, not because I needed more, but because it was the perfect symbol of how far I'd come. A townhouse in Brooklyn. A beach property in the Hamptons. Each acquisition was a quiet reminder to myself: I built this. No one handed it to me. Even socially, things shifted. I reconnected with old friends who'd supported me back when I was scraping by. I brought them into my world, introduced them to the kind of dinners and events my family always imagined were out of my league. These were the people who'd actually believed in me, and watching their eyes light up as they saw the life I'd built was a far better feeling than any nod of approval from my parents could have given me. The most satisfying part was knowing they had no idea this growth was happening. In their minds, I was still thinking it over, possibly struggling with the decision, maybe even feeling guilty for making them wait. They had no clue that every passing day made their leverage weaker and mine stronger. By the time summer rolled around, I was at the peak of my professional and personal life. The business was thriving, my influence was expanding, and I was surrounded by people who valued me for who I was, not what I could give them. And just when I thought they might finally back off, I got a message from Ryan that made me pause mid-meeting. It simply read, "We've decided to come by this weekend. We can talk in person." I stared at the screen for a long moment, a slow, deliberate smile spreading across my face. Because this time, I was ready for them. I didn't reply to Ryan's message right away. I let it sit there, unread in his mind, the little delivered icon taunting him. If they wanted to come to me, fine, but this time, they were walking straight into my territory, and I was going to make sure every second of it reminded them exactly where we stood. That week, I set things in motion quietly. First, I scheduled the meeting with a new PR firm I'd been considering for months. They specialized in high-profile brand image work, but what interested me most was their ability to document and publicize milestones. I wanted my professional wins, my philanthropic work, and my investments to be more visible, not just in the business world, but in the kind of social circles my parents had always admired from afar. If they were going to see me now, they were going to see all of it. Next, I called an old college friend, Mark, who now worked in private banking. Mark had been through plenty of rough times with me back when I was living paycheck to paycheck, and he understood why I was calling before I even explained. "So you're telling me," he said, half laughing, "you want the meeting to happen while you're signing the biggest deal of your career?" "Exactly," I told him. "I want them to walk in and see the ink drying." Mark didn't disappoint. By Friday, the paperwork was set, an acquisition deal worth more than they could imagine, one that would not only expand my company's reach, but put me in a position where my personal net worth would jump into a range that my parents used to talk about like it was reserved for people born into privilege. The night before they were supposed to arrive, I got an email from a mutual acquaintance, someone who still kept in touch with my parents despite knowing how they treated me. And it was a piece of information that made everything click into place. Ryan's business troubles were far worse than they'd admitted. Not only had he lost his investors, but he'd been using personal loans to keep things afloat, and one of those loans had been co-signed by my parents. If he defaulted, they would be on the hook for the full amount. Suddenly, their urgency made perfect sense. This wasn't just about helping Ryan. It was about saving themselves from financial disaster. And the number they had thrown at me before? 50,000. That wouldn't even make a dent. They'd need 5 times that just to stop the bleeding. I sat back in my chair after reading that email, the pieces falling neatly into place. This wasn't just an opportunity to refuse them. This was an opportunity to take control of the entire dynamic once and for all. When Saturday morning came, I had everything ready. Contracts on the table. A conference call scheduled with the acquisition team. My assistant, yes, I now had one, prepared to walk in with updates at timed intervals. Even the setting was intentional. The panoramic view of Manhattan from my living room, sunlight hitting the skyline just right, the kind of view you didn't just stumble into by accident. And as the elevator dinged and I heard their voices in the hall, I knew they were about to step into a completely different playing field, one where I finally held every card. The elevator doors slid open, and there they were, my dad in a suit that had clearly seen better days, my mom clutching her bag like it contained the last scraps of dignity she had left, and Ryan trailing behind, eyes flicking nervously around the hallway. I greeted them politely, stepping aside to let them in. "Right on time," I said with a small smile, gesturing toward the living room. They stepped inside, and just like before, I saw the flicker of surprise in their faces, the high ceilings, the artwork, the view that made the whole city feel like it was spread out at my feet. But this time, they didn't hide it well. Ryan's eyes went wide for a moment before he caught himself, and Dad muttered something under his breath about not realizing it was this nice. "Have a seat," I said, motioning to the sofa. On the table in front of them were neatly stacked folders, the kind you'd expect at a corporate boardroom, not a family meeting. My assistant, Claire, stepped into the room right on cue with 2 cups of coffee and a clipboard. "Oliver, the legal team is ready whenever you are," she said, then gave a courteous nod to my family before leaving. Dad's eyebrows rose. "Legal team." I shrugged lightly. "Just business. Today's actually a big day for me. Finalizing an acquisition." I let the words hang in the air just long enough for them to absorb. Ryan forced a smile. "That's good for you. But we wanted to talk about." "Of course," I interrupted smoothly, leaning forward. "Before we get into that, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page about something." I opened one of the folders and slid a sheet across the table. They looked down at it, confused. It wasn't a loan agreement. It was a simple 1-page financial snapshot. My company's current valuation, my personal holdings, and recent investments. Nothing overly detailed, but enough to make it crystal clear that $50,000 was nothing to me. Dad leaned back, narrowing his eyes. "So you can afford it." "I can," I said plainly. "But I choose very carefully where my money goes." And after hearing the full situation, I let my eyes flick to Ryan. I realize your problem isn't just a temporary cash flow issue. It's structural. Throwing money at it would just be setting it on fire. Ryan's jaw tightened. We're not here for a lecture, Oliver. We're here for help. That's the thing, I said, my voice steady. Help doesn't always look like a check. I paused for a beat, then added, and I don't give money to people who lie to me. Dad stiffened. What's that supposed to mean? I reached into the folder again and pulled out a printed copy of the email I'd received, the one detailing the loans, the defaults, the cosigns. I slid it across the table. It means I know exactly why you're here. You didn't just come for Ryan. You came because if he sinks, you go down with him. The silence was sharp. My mom's face paled. Ryan's mouth opened and closed like he was searching for a defense, and Dad's eyes hardened. You've been keeping that from me, I continued. And yet you still expected me to bail you out without question. That's not family. That's exploitation. Ryan leaned forward, his voice rising. So what? You're just going to sit there and let your own brother lose everything. I didn't flinch. My brother made his choices. And so did my parents. I learned a long time ago that rescuing people from the consequences of their actions only guarantees they'll repeat them. Then I smiled. Not a warm smile, but the kind of smile you give when the game is already over. So here's what's going to happen. I'm not giving you money. I'm not co-signing anything. And I'm certainly not putting myself in the line of fire for a business that's already halfway sunk. You came here expecting me to roll over like I always did. But that version of me doesn't exist anymore. Dad's face flushed with anger. But before he could speak, Claire re-entered the room. Oliver, the conference call is ready. The acquisition team is on the line. I stood, straightened my jacket, and looked down at them. I have to take this. Feel free to see yourselves out. And with that, I walked into my office, leaving them sitting there in stunned silence. The skyline behind them, the city humming below, and the reality of their failure settling in. But as I closed the door, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. When I came out of my office an hour later, the living room was empty. No note. No goodbye. Just the faint smell of my dad's aftershave lingering in the air and the untouched cups of coffee sitting cold on the table. I thought maybe that would be it, that they'd lick their wounds in private and I'd never hear from them again. But 2 days later, my phone rang. It was my mom. I let it go to voicemail, and when I finally listened, her voice was tight, brittle. Oliver, we lost the house. A long pause, then, your father says it's your fault. She hung up without saying anything else. The following week, I started hearing bits and pieces from people back home. Ryan's business had officially collapsed. Creditors were coming after every asset he had. My parents, tied to his loans, were forced to sell their home to cover part of the debt, but it still wasn't enough. They moved into a small rental on the edge of town, a far cry from the big house they'd always used as proof of their status. For years, they had treated me like I was the embarrassment of the family, the one they had to explain away at dinners and reunions. Now, they were the ones whispered about behind closed doors. And I didn't have to lift a finger. I just stepped out of the way and let reality do what it always does. Ryan tried reaching out once, a single angry email calling me heartless and accusing me of abandoning the family. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. I had offered them something better than money, the chance to face their own truth, and they'd chosen to spit on it. Months passed. My life kept climbing. New contracts, new investments, new partnerships that opened doors I hadn't even considered before. Every so often, I'd look out from my penthouse balcony at the city stretching out before me and think about that night in the rain when they told me to go sleep in my car. I never sought revenge in the way they probably imagined. I didn't sabotage them, didn't make calls to ruin their chances. I simply refused to be used. And in doing so, I let their own decisions write the ending for them. The last time I saw them was at a mutual acquaintance's wedding. They avoided me entirely, sticking to the far side of the room. But as I was leaving, I caught my dad watching me from across the hall, his expression a mix of resentment and something else I'd never seen in his eyes before. It took me a moment to realize what it was. Respect. And I left that night knowing they'd never forget the day they came to my door, expecting the old Oliver, and met someone they couldn't control. My name's Ryan. I'm 32, and for as long as I can remember, my family has been convinced I'm a walking disappointment. It didn't matter what I did. If my older brother bought a used car, they'd brag about it for months. But if I closed a major business deal, they'd barely look up from their phones. Growing up, I learned early that praise in my household was reserved for anyone but me. Over the years, I built a quiet habit. I stopped telling them anything about my life. Not my plans, not my successes, not the fact that I had quietly built 3 companies from the ground up. To them, I was still the broke kid who never did anything right. The conversation that lit the fuse happened in my parents' living room one rainy Saturday afternoon. I had stopped by because my mother said she wanted to discuss something important. When I arrived, my parents were sitting side by side on the couch, arms crossed, faces cold. My brother, Mark, was leaning in the doorway with that smug half-smile he always wore when he thought he was about to watch me get humiliated. My father's voice was sharp and final. "Ryan, you're on your own now. We can't keep helping you. You're a grown man. It's time you stopped being a burden." I just blinked at him. I hadn't asked for help in years. My mom chimed in with a pitying sigh. "We know things have been hard for you, but at some point you have to accept reality. You can't just drift forever." They didn't ask if I was okay. They didn't ask about my work. They didn't care. Mark snorted, tossing in his 2 cents. "Face it, Ryan. You've always been the broke disgrace of the family. You should be grateful they've supported you this long." I looked around the room, taking in the cheap satisfaction on their faces, and felt something click into place. That moment, the smugness, the dismissal, burned itself into my mind. They thought they were cutting me off. The truth? I'd been financially independent for nearly a decade. What they didn't know was that I had more money in one of my company's petty cash accounts than they'd seen in their entire lives. Still, I didn't correct them. I didn't defend myself. I simply stood up, walked down the hallway, and began packing the few personal items I kept at their house from my younger years. My dad muttered something about me finally learning to fend for myself as I passed him, but I kept my face neutral. In that moment, my silence was deliberate, almost surgical. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of an argument. They'd already written their version of the story, and nothing I said would change it. Better to let them believe it for now. As I left with my small duffel bag, the rain had picked up, splattering across the windshield of my car. My phone buzzed with a single text from my mom. "We hope this will be a wake-up call for you." I stared at the words for a long time before putting the phone face down on the passenger seat. There was no anger, just a deep, quiet resolve settling in my chest. If they wanted distance, they were going to get it. But I already knew this wasn't the end of the story. Not even close. What they didn't realize was that in a matter of weeks, they'd be forced to see the real picture, and they wouldn't be able to ignore it, no matter how much they wished they could. And the first seed of that moment was planted the very next day, when I got an unexpected phone call that set everything in motion. The next morning, I woke up to a string of missed calls from my mother. At first, I thought maybe someone had gotten sick or there was an emergency, but when I finally listened to her voicemail, it was just her telling me that Mark needed a loan and that I should be a team player for once. No good morning. No, how are you? Not even a hint that we just had a conversation the day before where they essentially disowned me. It was surreal, like they'd reset the board overnight and assumed I'd play along as the family's punching bag again. I didn't respond. Instead, I went about my day, focusing on meetings with my management teams and finalizing a deal with a new supplier for one of my companies. But the calls kept coming, this time from Mark himself. His tone was smug at first, then impatient when I didn't answer, and finally flat out insulting in the string of texts that followed. "You still living in that dump? Don't act like you can't spare a few hundred for your brother." That few hundred was quickly upgraded to a few thousand once he explained that he had an opportunity to invest in a friend's startup. I knew exactly what that meant. Mark had found another one of his gambling buddies with a can't-lose scheme. That week, my parents hosted one of their regular family dinners, and despite the sting from our last conversation, I decided to attend, mostly out of curiosity. I wanted to see how far this favoritism would go when I gave them nothing to work with. The second I walked through the door, I might as well have been invisible. Mark was holding court at the table, talking about his business prospects, while my parents nodded approvingly. He didn't have a business. He had a series of failed ventures and debt collectors who knew him by name. But you wouldn't know that by the way they were looking at him like he was some visionary. When I tried to join the conversation, my mother cut me off mid-sentence to ask Mark about his next steps. My father poured him a drink, calling him the go-getter in the family. I sat there quietly, sipping water, watching this theater unfold. At one point, my mom actually said, If only Ryan had your ambition, Mark. I nearly laughed out loud at the irony. My lack of ambition had built 3 companies and employed more than 50 people. Then came the moment that solidified everything for me. After dinner, as everyone was lingering in the living room, my father handed Mark an envelope, cash. A lot of it. My mom smiled and said, "Just to help you get started, honey. We know you'll do great things." I wasn't offered a dime. I wasn't even acknowledged. It was as if the earlier conversation in which they cut me off was really just their way of saying they'd chosen who they were investing in, and it wasn't me. On the drive home, I replayed the night in my head, not with anger this time, but with a kind of cold clarity. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a deliberate rewriting of reality. In their minds, Mark was the achiever, and I was the perpetual failure, no matter what I actually accomplished. And they were committed to that version of the story because it gave them someone to feel superior to. I knew then that proving them wrong wouldn't be enough. They needed to be confronted with the truth in a way that would shatter the fantasy they'd built. But before that could happen, the tension would need to reach its breaking point. And that came faster than I expected when they involved me in something I had no intention of touching. It was a Thursday afternoon when the betrayal landed in my lap. I was in my office going over quarterly reports when my phone buzzed with a message from my bank. At first, I thought it was just a routine notification until I saw the amount. A withdrawal of $7,500 had been made from one of my personal accounts. Not my business accounts, one of my private, untouched for years savings accounts that I kept more for sentiment than utility. My chest tightened. The account was supposed to be locked down, accessible only by me. Or so I thought. I called the bank immediately, and after a long chain of security questions and holds, the representative told me the withdrawal had been made in person at a branch in my parents' neighborhood. The signature on the slip? My own name, or at least someone's attempt at it. That's when the rep casually added, "It was processed without issue because your mother was on the account as a secondary holder." My stomach dropped. I hadn't even realized her name was still attached. It dated back to when I opened the account at 18. I didn't have to guess where the money went. Later that evening, my suspicion was confirmed in the most brazen way possible. I got a group text from my mom, my dad, and Mark, an image of him leaning against a shiny, candy red motorcycle, grinning like a lottery winner. The caption from my mom read, "Mark finally got the bike he deserves." We all chipped in to help him out. The word "all" burned into me. They weren't pretending to hide it. They were proud of what they'd done. When I called my mother, she answered cheerfully, as if nothing had happened. "Oh, Ryan, you sound upset. You know Mark's been dreaming about that bike for years. We thought it was only fair to give him a little boost." I was silent for a beat, my jaw tightening. "With my money?" I finally asked. There was a pause, then a dismissive laugh. "Oh, please. It was just sitting there. You never used that account. And besides, family helps family. One day you'll understand." That was the moment something shifted in me. This wasn't just favoritism anymore. It was theft, plain and simple. And the way she spoke, the way she dismissed it, told me everything I needed to know. They didn't see it as wrong. In their eyes, my hard-earned money was just part of the family's communal pool, free to be tapped whenever the golden child needed it. Over the next few days, the betrayal festered. My father doubled down, calling me selfish for making a fuss over a few $1,000s. Mark sent me a smug text, "Don't be sore, man. I'll take you for a ride sometime." That was his idea of gratitude. The worst part wasn't even the theft. It was how casually they'd done it, how convinced they were that I wouldn't, or couldn't, do anything about it. That week, I didn't reach out. I didn't confront them further. I just let the silence grow, knowing that they'd interpret it as sulking. In reality, I was putting pieces together, mentally cataloging every insult, every slight, every time they'd taken without asking. And I was starting to see a path forward. A slow, deliberate path that would require patience, but when it was finished, there'd be no going back for any of us. Then, right when the air between us was already thick with tension, they made another move. One so audacious it nearly took my breath away. 2 weeks after the motorcycle stunt, I got a call from my landlord. Well, not my actual landlord, but the one who managed the small condo I'd been renting for years as my city base. He sounded uneasy, almost embarrassed. "Ryan, I don't know how to say this, but your parents came by today. They told the building management you'd moved out and weren't paying rent anymore." They even tried to get into your unit. At first, I thought he had to be mistaken. But then he explained they had shown up with a stack of papers, photocopies of old bills with my name on them, a letter claiming they were responsible for me, and even some outdated ID copies from when I lived under their roof. They told the building manager they were taking over my unit because I couldn't handle things on my own. I sat there, stunned, holding the phone to my ear as my landlord went on about how he'd had to refuse them entry and call security. The sheer audacity left me in a daze. It wasn't enough that they stole from me. They were now trying to dismantle the life I'd built entirely, to paint me as incompetent to strangers, to insert themselves where they had no right. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The walls felt closer, the air heavier. I wasn't financially struggling, far from it, but the psychological weight was crushing. I realized that even with all the distance I tried to create, they still had little hooks in my life. Old accounts, old addresses, scraps of outdated authority they could twist into leverage. They didn't need permission, they'd just take. A few days later, my father left me a voicemail that felt more like a threat disguised as concern. "Son, you're making this harder than it needs to be. We've been doing our best to look out for you. But if you keep acting like you don't need us, don't be surprised when you find doors closing on you. We know people." His tone was calm, almost patronizing, but the message was clear. They were willing to tarnish my name if it meant keeping me in their control. For the first time in years, I felt truly cornered. Every instinct screamed to lash out, to confront them head-on, to call them thieves and manipulators to their faces. But I didn't. Not because I was afraid, but because I knew they'd just twist it, make me the villain. If I was going to win this, it couldn't be in the heat of an argument. It had to be planned, precise. So I started quietly cutting every remaining tie. I closed the old savings account. I transferred my city base to a new property under one of my holding companies so my name wouldn't even be on the public record. I updated every piece of contact information with banks, utilities, and professional networks. To the outside world, it probably looked like I was pulling away out of bitterness, but in reality, I was methodically erasing every thread they could tug on. It was lonely. Some nights I'd sit in my kitchen, staring at my phone, half hoping for a genuine apology, half knowing it would never come. Every family photo on my shelf started to feel like a lie. And still, even as I fortified my life against them, I could feel their shadow stretching over me. I thought I had more time before they tried something else. I thought my silence and distance might cool things down. But I was wrong. Because the very next month, I got an invitation that would drag me back into their orbit, one I couldn't ignore, and one that would put me face to face with all of them in a room I couldn't easily walk out of. The invitation came in the form of a thick, cream-colored envelope with gold lettering. Inside was a glossy card announcing my parents' 40th wedding anniversary celebration, complete with an RSVP card and a note in my mother's looping handwriting. It would mean a lot if you could come. Family should be together on special occasions. I almost laughed. Family should be together? Where was that sentiment when they emptied my savings account or tried to take over my home? But I didn't throw it away. Instead, I placed it on my desk, right beside my laptop, and let it sit there as I thought about what my life looked like now compared to the version they believed. In the months since cutting my last remaining ties, things had accelerated for me in ways I hadn't even planned. One of my companies had landed a major contract with a European distributor, and the influx of revenue was staggering. Another business I'd founded years ago, a small but promising tech startup, was quietly bought out by a larger firm, putting a seven-figure payout directly into my account. And my third company, a consultancy I ran under the radar, had just expanded into 2 new cities. I'd never been one to flaunt wealth, but now I was starting to see the strategic value in letting it be known, at the right time, to the right people. I upgraded my city residence from the modest condo to a luxury penthouse overlooking the river, complete with floor-to-ceiling windows and a private rooftop terrace. I bought a car I'd always admired, a sleek, midnight blue coupe that seemed to glide rather than drive. I even started working with a personal assistant, freeing up more of my time to focus on the bigger picture. Physically, I changed too. Months of working with a personal trainer had me in better shape than I'd been since my early 20s, and my wardrobe had shifted from comfortable and forgettable to tailored suits, clean lines, and confidence. I wasn't just financially independent now. I was in control, sharp, and ready. What surprised me most was how light I felt. The absence of their constant criticism was like fresh air. I surrounded myself with people who actually respected me, business partners, close friends, even a few mentors who had nothing to gain from me except good conversation. My circle was smaller, but infinitely stronger. Still, that invitation sat on my desk, untouched. I'd glance at it during late-night work sessions, wondering if showing up would be worth the trouble. Part of me wanted to ignore it entirely, leave them in the dark forever. But another part of me, the strategic part, saw the opportunity. An event where everyone in the extended family would be present. A place where my parents and Mark couldn't spin their narrative without me standing right there, living proof of the truth. If I went, I knew I couldn't just walk in as Ryan who survived their treatment. I'd have to arrive as someone they couldn't dismiss, someone they couldn't talk over or minimize. That meant planning, not just my entrance, but the entire way I would carry myself in that room. The weeks leading up to the anniversary were almost like preparing for a high-stakes business pitch. I made subtle changes, choosing the perfect suit, confirming the right car service, arranging my schedule so I could arrive without rush. I even made sure a few select people in my extended family got a glimpse of my success beforehand, planting small seeds that would grow into whispers by the time I walked through those doors. By the time the day of the anniversary arrived, I was ready, more than ready. And as my car pulled up in front of the elegant hotel ballroom they'd rented for the event, I caught sight of my reflection in the tinted window. Calm, collected, not the broke disgrace they thought they'd thrown away, but the man they never imagined I could become. What I didn't know was that my arrival would trigger more than whispers. It would cause a ripple that would travel through that room faster than I could have planned. The hotel ballroom was buzzing when I walked in, warm lighting spilling across the polished floor, the low hum of conversation blending with the clink of glasses. The moment I stepped inside, I felt the shift. Heads turned, mid-sentence conversations paused for a fraction of a second. It wasn't just the suit or the car I'd pulled up in. It was the way I carried myself. I moved through the crowd slowly, greeting distant relatives I hadn't seen in years. Some of them gave me polite, guarded nods, clearly still under the impression that I'd been struggling. Others, the ones who had heard the whispers I'd carefully seeded, looked at me with thinly veiled curiosity. I could practically hear them wondering, what happened to Ryan? He's different. It didn't take long to find my parents and Mark. They were stationed at a table near the front, surrounded by a few of their closest allies, people who had no doubt been fed years of my parents' poor Ryan narrative. My mother's smile froze when she saw me. My father's eyes narrowed just slightly, a flicker of unease behind them. Mark, on the other hand, smirked like he was already planning some condescending comment. I didn't give them the chance. I simply smiled, offered a calm, good evening, and moved on to mingle. The beauty of the setup was that I didn't need to force anything. My presence alone was enough to stir the air. And that's when the first piece of useful information came my way. I was speaking with my cousin Emily, someone I'd always liked but rarely saw, when she leaned in a little closer and lowered her voice. Ryan, I don't know if you know this, but Mark's been telling people you're in debt, that you moved into some rundown apartment after your business collapsed. She glanced over her shoulder toward my parents' table. He's been bragging that Mom and Dad had to step in to keep you afloat. There it was, the narrative in action, shameless and unchecked. But Emily didn't stop there. Oh, and there's something else. Mark's been trying to pitch this investment opportunity to a bunch of relatives tonight. I overheard him telling Uncle Tom he's got your backing on it, that you're going to put in a large sum to make it happen. She looked at me, concerned. You're not, right? I almost laughed. So that was his angle. Use my supposed debt to get sympathy from some, and my fake backing to get credibility with others. He was trying to position me as his safety net in front of the whole family. It was manipulative, sloppy, and, most importantly, an opportunity. Because if Mark was building his pitch on my name, then all I had to do was make the truth public in a way that dismantled not just the lie, but the entire foundation of their image. And I had the perfect stage to do it, an event filled with family, friends, and people whose opinions my parents valued more than they'd ever admit. I kept my composure, thanking Emily for telling me, and continued to work the room. By the time dinner was served, I'd learned more than I expected. Not only had Mark been trying to rope relatives into his scheme, but my parents had been actively endorsing it, telling everyone they would match whatever I supposedly invested. They were leveraging my name and credibility without my consent and in front of an audience. That's when the final piece fell into place. The MC announced that after the meal, there would be a short segment for family tributes, a chance for relatives to share memories or well wishes for my parents. A microphone, a captive audience, and my name already on everyone's lips. All I had to do was wait for my turn. And when it came, I wasn't going to waste a single word. Dessert plates had just been cleared when the MC stepped up to the microphone, smiling warmly as he explained the family tributes segment. People laughed and clapped politely as a few aunts and uncles took turns sharing sentimental stories, childhood anecdotes about my parents, tales from family trips decades ago. It was lighthearted, harmless. Then the MC looked around the room, his eyes landing on me. "Ryan," he said, "I believe you wanted to say a few words." I stood, buttoning my suit jacket slowly. The room quieted, not completely, but enough that I felt dozens of eyes on me. I walked to the microphone, taking my time, my expression calm. My parents shifted slightly in their seats, a faint flicker of unease passing between them. Mark leaned back in his chair, smirking, clearly expecting me to stammer through something awkward or forgettable. I began with warmth, thanking everyone for coming together to celebrate such a long marriage. I spoke about how marriage was about building a legacy, not just financially, but in how you treat the people around you. Heads nodded, people smiled. My parents even relaxed a little, thinking I was going to keep it generic. Then I pivoted. "I've heard a lot of stories tonight," I said, scanning the crowd. "And it reminded me of how our family loves to tell stories. But sometimes, the stories people tell about you aren't quite true." A few eyebrows lifted. My gaze drifted toward Mark, just long enough for the shift in tone to land. "I understand there's been some talk, recently, even tonight, about my supposed financial troubles. That I've been struggling, that I'm in debt, that I've been relying on certain generous family members to stay afloat." I paused, letting the murmurs ripple. "So I want to be clear, for everyone here, once and for all, that story isn't true. In fact, it couldn't be further from the truth." I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "In the last 12 months, the 3 companies I own have grown beyond anything I imagined. We employ over 50 people. We've expanded internationally. And last quarter alone, our combined revenue was," I named the figure, and the silence was immediate. Forks stopped halfway to mouths. I placed the envelope on the podium and continued. "This is a donation receipt from a recent charity auction I sponsored in my own name. The amount is larger than the sum total of the so-called help I've supposedly received in my lifetime. I share this not to boast, but to set the record straight." My eyes swept across the room, landing squarely on Mark. "And for anyone who's been approached tonight about investing in a certain business venture, I want to make this crystal clear. I am not, and will not be, financially involved. If someone has used my name to imply otherwise, they are lying. I would strongly advise you to consider that before handing over a single cent." Gasps. Whispers. A few people outright turned to glare at my brother. Mark's smirk had vanished, replaced by the tight, pale look of someone whose scheme had just crumbled in public. My parents sat frozen, their smiles long gone, their eyes darting between me and the guests as if trying to gauge just how much damage had been done. I finished simply, thanking everyone again for being here, and stepped away from the microphone. No raised voice, no dramatic accusations, just a clean, surgical dismantling of their lies in front of every person whose opinion mattered to them. As I walked back to my seat, I could feel the shift in the room. Conversations were hushed but pointed, and none of them were about my supposed failures anymore. I passed my parents' table without looking at them, but I could feel the heat of their stares. Mark muttered something under his breath as I went by, but I didn't catch it, and I didn't care. Because the truth was out now, and it was bigger than their version of the story ever could be. What I didn't expect was how quickly the fallout would spread, faster and far more publicly than even I had planned. The fallout began before the night was even over. As the program wrapped up and people began milling around again, I noticed a small circle forming near the bar, half a dozen relatives speaking in low, clipped tones, their eyes flicking toward Mark. My cousin Emily caught my gaze from across the room and gave me a subtle nod, as if to say, "It's working." By the time I collected my coat, word had spread like wildfire. Several aunts and uncles had already pulled their hands back from Mark's investment pitch, suddenly remembering urgent reasons why they couldn't commit. One particularly blunt uncle told him flat out, "If Ryan's not backing you, I'm out." I didn't need to hear more to know the rest of the evening wouldn't go well for him. My parents, however, didn't approach me until almost everyone had left. My mother's smile was brittle, her voice pitched just high enough to sound polite, but tight with strain. "Ryan, was that really necessary?" she asked, each word clipped. My father's jaw was set. "You humiliated your family tonight," he added, the implication heavy, as if I was the one who had twisted the truth. I met their eyes evenly. "I didn't humiliate anyone. I just told the truth. You're upset because it's harder to control the narrative now." I let the words hang there, watching as the meaning landed. My mother's smile faltered. My father's mouth twitched like he wanted to argue, but nothing came out. Mark didn't say a word to me that night. He just stormed past, his face flushed and tight, heading straight for the exit. Later, I'd hear from Emily that within a week, several relatives had called him out directly, demanding explanations for the lies. The investment idea was dead, his credibility in tatters. Worse for him, a few of those same relatives had quietly reached out to me for business advice, something I knew would sting far more than losing their money. As for my parents, the distance between us became a canyon. They stopped calling, stopped inviting me to smaller family events. And I let them. I didn't need to keep defending myself against people who had already decided who I was in their minds. My life, my work, and my relationships with people who respected me were worth far more than their approval ever could be. Months later, I hosted a charity gala for one of my companies. It was covered in the local paper, complete with photos of me standing alongside other business leaders. I didn't send them a copy of the article. I didn't need to. I knew they'd see it eventually, just like I knew they'd recognize that I'd built a life without them, and that it was better than anything they'd imagined for me. That night at the anniversary, as I'd walked away from the microphone, I realized something important. Revenge doesn't always come from shouting the loudest or winning the argument. Sometimes, it comes from calmly holding up a mirror so they can see exactly what they've become. And once they see it, they can never unsee it.